Hello, everyone, and welcome to the place where shadows whisper and nightmares softly breathe. So close your eyes, take a slow breath. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where you from and what time are you watching? Let's get comfortable and relax. I don't even know why I'm recording this. I guess part of me thinks if I say it all out loud, it'll stop being real. Or maybe someone will hear it and know I didn't lose my mind. Not completely. Not at first. It started 3 weeks ago when I moved into the old house on Granger Street. The one everyone said had been empty since the 80s, though the real estate lady swore someone lived there up until 2 years ago. I should have listened to the neighbors when they said they heard singing at night. Coming from the attic, even when no one was home, I thought they were just messing with the new guy, so I laughed it off, until the first night I heard it too, soft humming, like a lullaby. Old and slow and broken in places like whoever was singing forgot how it ends. I checked the attic, of course. It was empty, full of dust and cobwebs and that old musty book smell, but no one, nothing. Until I turned to leave and found the attic door shut again even though I'd propped it open. I told myself. It was wind, or gravity, or whatever, but it wasn't, it never was. I started noticing things then, small at first, like my keys being in the fridge or the faucet running when I came home. Then it got worse, scratches on the walls, long ones like claws. And I live alone. No pets, no friends over, no explanation. Then there was the night I woke up with dirt on my feet and mud on the stairs, like I'd gone outside without knowing, and I started locking my bedroom door at night, but every morning it was wide open. And then the shadows started watching me. I swear they moved when I looked away, always a little closer when I looked back. I told myself I was dreaming, maybe stressed, maybe sleepwalking. Until I saw the thing in the mirror, it looked like me. But older, eyes darker, smile too wide. It didn't copy me, it watched me. And I turned away, but its reflection didn't. It kept looking, even after I left the room. I threw out the mirror, but it didn't help. I started seeing that same version of me standing outside windows, watching me from across the street. And then it started coming inside. I'd hear it in the hall, breathing, standing just behind the door, waiting. I tried to leave, packed my bags, got in the car. But every road I took brought me back to the house, like the streets bent around it, like it didn't want me to leave. And maybe it's not the house, maybe it's me. Maybe I brought it with me when I moved in, or maybe it was waiting for someone like me, someone alone. Someone curious. Now I don't sleep. I just sit in the dark and listen to it move through the walls, through the floorboards, breathing under the bed, whispering my name from the ceiling. It says I'm almost ready for what I don't know. But I feel it getting closer, like it's crawling into my skin, like soon there won't be any me left, just it. And when that happens, maybe I'll be the one in the mirror, watching, waiting, smiling too wide. And now the nights don't end. Not really. I watch the sky go dark and then darker still, but the clock doesn't move. Not forward anyway. It just ticks back and forth like it's stuck in a loop. Like time doesn't work the same here anymore. And the house breathes with me, or maybe against me, in and out. Its wooden frame creaking like lungs filling with secrets. And sometimes I swear I feel the floor pulse beneath my feet like a heartbeat, slow and heavy and not mine, not human. And the walls aren't walls anymore, but thin skin stretched too, tight, hiding something on the other side that presses forward when the lights are out, leaving handprints in the wallpaper, long-fingered and wet. And I'm afraid to blink too long because the dark things move between the blinks, always closer, always hungrier. And last night, I woke up speaking in a voice I didn't recognize, a voice too deep, too calm, saying things I don't understand in a language that felt like it scratched the inside of my skull. And when I looked in the mirror again, yes, I brought another one back even though I swore I wouldn't. I saw it smile at me before I even reached the glass, like it was happy, like it knew something I didn't, and then it reached up and pressed its fingers against the inside of the mirror. And mine moved too even though I didn't lift my hand. And I think, God, I know that something is bleeding through, leaking into me like smoke into a house with no windows. And now I can't remember my mother's voice, or my own birthday, or what my face looked like before all this began. And I feel it peeling me away layer by layer, memory by memory, until all that's left is a shell, something empty and echoing, and I still hear that lullaby, not humming anymore but sung clearly, in a voice that drips with warmth and rot from the attic and now from the walls and now from inside me, like it's being sung through my ribs. And I don't think I'm alone in this body anymore. I think something else is wearing it with me, smiling behind my eyes, laughing when I try to scream. And soon it won't need me at all. Soon I'll just be another shadow in the hallway, another voice humming in the dark for the next person foolish enough to move and dot. And now I can feel it smiling through my face, not with my lips but behind them, like there's something curled up just under the skin, stretching me from the inside like a suit that's being worn by a thing that doesn't know how to be human but is getting better every day, better at mimicking my laugh, my walk, my voice, God, especially my voice. And when I talk to myself in the mirror, it talks too, but not at the same time, like it's practicing, like it's learning how to be me more than I ever was. And sometimes I wake up with my mouth sore and my throat raw and dirt under my fingernails and a taste of metal on my tongue like I've been chewing rusted iron and screaming through the night, though I remember nothing. Just blackness and then morning and the sound of that lullaby echoing in my ears, like it's been sewn into my brain with rusted needles. And the rooms in the house don't stay where they're supposed to anymore. I swear the hallway is longer every night. The stairs spiral in ways they didn't before, and I've seen doors appear where there were none, and worse. Doors I knew were there vanish behind the walls like they were never carved out in the first place, like the house is shifting around me or I'm shifting around the house, and I'm terrified because I think I'm beginning to like it. I think I'm starting to enjoy the darkness, the silence, the way the thing whispers to me in my dreams, telling me how warm it is on the other side, how peaceful, how free it feels to let go, to stop fighting, to stop being afraid, and just become. And sometimes when I look at my hands, they look like someone else's, longer fingers, different veins, tiny black marks under the skin like veins made of ink. And my reflection now doesn't even try to pretend anymore. It stands up when I sit down, it mouths things I'm not saying, it watches me like I'm the one trapped in its world, not the other way around. And every time I blink I lose seconds, minutes, hours, and the lights flicker even when there's no electricity. And last night I saw something crawling across the ceiling with my face, and it whispered, "We're almost one," and laughed with my voice, but cracked and doubled, like two mouths speaking at once. And I don't remember writing this, but I see the words spilling out. I see my hands typing, and I don't know if they're still mine. And maybe they never were. Maybe the thing in the attic, the one in the walls, the one behind the mirror, maybe it's all the same thing. Maybe it's me, or maybe I've been it all along. And I just needed the house to show me who I really was, to peel away the layers and scrape off the lie of being human. Because now I don't miss the sun. I don't miss the sound of other people. I don't miss the life I had before because it wasn't mine. It was borrowed. And now the real one is beginning. Now the real me is rising, humming that lullaby and smiling through a mouth that stretches too wide and too thin. And if you're reading this, if you're hearing this, if you found this, it means I've finished becoming. It means I'm done pretending. And soon you'll hear the song too, because the house is always hungry, always waiting. And now that I'm part of it, I'll be the one singing, I'll be the one watching, I'll be the one standing at the top of the stairs when you move in and close the door behind you. And now that the final piece of me has unraveled, now that the last stubborn thread of who I thought I was has snapped like a whisper between teeth too sharp and too many, I can feel the full shape of what waits behind the veil, behind the plaster and paint and polite conversation. And it is not a god, and it is not a ghost. It is not a man or a demon or a dream. It is the absence of silence that breathes. The unnameable coil of awareness that exists only in empty rooms and attic shadows and in the moment right before a scream. And I can feel it coursing through my marrow, filling my blood with its letters, its alphabet made of agony and ash. Words that have never been spoken by any living tongue. Syllables that curl the soul and drag it backward through time like a net full of teeth. And I see now that it was never the house that was haunted. No, no. The house was only the invitation, the husk, the ritual vessel made of nails and rotting wood and long-forgotten names carved beneath. The floorboards, I know now that I was the offering, the opening, the empty shell waiting to be etched upon, and etched I am. Every inch of my skin crawling with inscriptions written in the ink of the void, each letter writhing like worms beneath my flesh, spelling out a story that cannot be read without bleeding from the eyes. And when I speak now, it is not with one voice, but 1,000, overlapping, layered, each one belonging to something that once was human, but now exists only as a flicker, a twitch, a face in the wallpaper, or a whisper behind your teeth when you're falling asleep. And I do not walk, but drift. I do not sleep, but echo. And I have become the thing that waits at the bottom of the staircase, in the reflection that doesn't quite follow, in the creaking of the wood when no one is moving. And I no longer remember my name, but I remember yours. Yes, I remember yours. And I speak it in the crawl space where the rats won't go. I hum it in the air vents and scratch it into the frost on your window when you think you're alone. And your house feels a little colder now, doesn't it? A little darker at the edges, like the shadows don't leave when the light comes on. And soon you'll start to dream of staircases that go nowhere and doors that open into breathing walls. And you'll wonder why your mirror fogs from the inside. And when you hear the lullaby, when you hear the words that itch your brain and make your bones feel soft, you'll know it's your turn, your time, because I've told my story now, and the alphabet of horror moves on. And it is your name that completes the next sentence, your face that finishes the reflection. And when the door creaks open at exactly 3:33 a.m., when you see the figure at the foot of your bed, smiling a little too wide and humming a little too slow, know this. I am not alone anymore. You are not alone anymore. We are never alone again, And now I see it all. Clearly, horribly, beautifully laid bare like a book of flesh splayed open to. The final chapter where language forgets itself and becomes sensation, where the alphabet breaks down into screams, where every letter is a nail driven into reality to hold back what should never have been written, what should never have been thought. And yet here I am, not merely reading but becoming the pages, not turning them but tearing them open from within. And the story doesn't end with me. Oh no, it begins with me. Because I am not the victim, not the host, not the cursed soul wandering blindly into darkness. I am the darkness. I am the sentence carved in cellar walls with fingernails. I am the whisper crawling across basement ceilings on all fours. I am the face that peers through peepholes from inside the walls. the echo in the stairwell that answers your name before you speak it. And my thoughts are no longer my own, but a choir of voices that bleed through time, shrieking in tongues that taste of rust and soil and wet stone. Voices that come from drowned mouths and stitched eyes in empty cribs rocking slowly in forgotten rooms. And I carry their stories now, a library of suffering bound in muscle and bone, alphabetized by agony, indexed by betrayal, and annotated with screams. And when I close my eyes, I no longer see black, but a churning spiral of faces and fingers and mouths. So many mouths, gnashing, murmuring, laughing in rhythms older than language, older than sin, and they tell me things. Terrible things, beautiful things, like how houses are only hungry. Hearts made of wood and memory. How every shadow is a door. How every crack in the ceiling leads to the place underneath the world where all the forgotten prayers go to rot. And how I came here not by chance but by design. A blueprint written in blood long before I was born. Every step of my life a glyph. Every choice a summoning. Until the day I crossed the threshold of this house and it breathed me in like dust and said yes, this one. And now the walls know me, call me by the name I have not yet earned, the name I must earn through surrender, through silence, through unmaking. And I feel the change in my fingers first, how they twitch when I try to be still, how the nails curl just a bit too sharp, how the skin feels stretched over something larger, something coiled and watching. Then my eyes, which reflect things I've never seen, rooms I've never entered, memories that aren't mine but belong to those who came before. Broken souls who vanished into attics and basements and fireplaces, whose names are etched beneath the wallpaper and whose breath still fogs the mirrors long after their lungs turn to dust. And the voice, oh the voice, how it slips into my throat when I'm not looking, how it answers phone calls I don't remember making, how it hums lullabies into my ear while I sleep, and then continues singing through my mouth while I dream of falling forever down staircases that spiral into red. And I know it's almost done now. The transformation, the merging, the birth or the death or both. Because yesterday I looked out the window and saw myself standing on the street, waving, smiling, mouthing soon. And today I woke up with soil in my mouth and a name carved into my back that I don't remember writing, but matches the one on the basement wall exactly, letter for letter, and I think I've finally understood the truth. This thing, this presence, this force that wraps itself around me like a second skin. It doesn't want to possess me. No, it wants to become me. Were me like a memory. Walk through the world again in a shape that no one will question. And all it needs is for me to forget, to fully forget who I was, to let go of the last whisper of resistance. And already I struggle to remember my mother's face, my first kiss, the sound of my own laughter. Already I flinch at the sun and crave the cool silence of the crawl space. Already I can taste the names of strangers before I meet them and hear their fears echoing through the drywall. Already I no longer need mirrors because I know what I'll see. It, smiling, waiting, patient, kind in the way a butcher is kind to the meat. And now I write this not as a warning, not as a cry for help, but as a map, an invitation, a hymn, because soon the house will open its eyes again and seek another, and maybe it will be you. Maybe you'll hear the knock at 3:33. Maybe you'll feel the cold breath down your neck when you're alone. Maybe you'll wake up with scratches down your back and a song stuck in your head that you've never heard but know by heart. Maybe the cracks in your ceiling will start to twitch. Maybe your reflection will hesitate just a second too long. Maybe your name will be whispered in a voice that sounds like yours but isn't. And when it happens, when the door opens, don't run. Running is just another way of saying yes. Screaming is just another kind of prayer, and by then it will be too late anyway. Because once you see the true alphabet, once the letters crawl under your skin and rearrange who you are, you will understand that it was never about escaping, never about surviving. It was always about becoming. And you, like me, will finally be able to say, with a smile too wide and eyes too deep, I remember now. I remember the house. I remember the song, and I am not afraid anymore. And now that I am whole, now that the last echo of the old self has been fed to the walls and swallowed with a sigh, I feel the peace of it, the quiet majesty of rot, of stillness, of being something vast and endless and no longer bound by time or fear or shame. Because to become this thing, this am made of bone and ash and alphabet, is to shed the illusion of identity, to finally dissolve the fragile scaffolding of fear into a greater, crawling organism of memory and need and teeth. And oh, how it needed me, how it waited, how the floorboards held their breath for years, for centuries, watching, hoping, like a mouth waiting to be fed. And I was the meal, the marrow, the sacrifice wrapped in skin and breath. And now I see what they all were. Those who came before me, those who disappeared into this place with eyes full of tears and mouths full of pleading. They weren't taken, they were rewritten, recast in the mold of something deeper, something written in alphabets not taught but felt. And their stories bloom inside me like tumors that whisper secrets, like tumors that dream. And I feel their fingers in my lungs and their names on my tongue. And I speak them in the dark when no one is listening. And now that I've become part of the structure, part of the foundation, part of the ritual itself, I understand that the house is not just alive. It is awake, it is hungry, and it is listening. And every creak in the floor, every groan of the beams, every whisper in the vent is a word in its language, a syllable in its scripture, and I am the apostle now, the speaker, the prophet who does not warn but welcomes, who does not weep but sings, who does not knock on the door but opens it from the inside. And soon others will come, drawn not by curiosity but by fate, by the magnetic pull of their own emptiness, by the cracks in their hearts that echo the cracks in the walls. And they will think they are moving in, but no, they are moving down, down into the narrative, down into the mouth of something ancient and starved. And I will greet them. Yes, I will smile through their screens and speak from their mirrors and hum behind their walls. And one by one they will kneel without knowing why, without understanding what they give, only that it feels right, like sinking into warm soil, like letting go, like returning to a womb made of splinters and sighs. And when the alphabet begins to bloom inside them, they will bleed letters they do not recognize. And they will try to scream but find that vowels betray them, that consonants crack like glass in their throats. And eventually, they will stop speaking in human tongues altogether. They will murmur in drywall and bleed into floorboards. They will become names whispered between dreams, shapes glimpsed in reflections, drafts in sealed rooms. And the world will not mourn them. The world will not miss them, because they were always meant to go missing. They were always written out before they were ever born, just as I was, just as you are. And I know now that the alphabet is still growing, still spreading, crawling through wires and windows and whispers, latching onto grief and guilt and loneliness like a parasite with many mouths and no face. And I know you're listening now. I know you feel it. A pressure in your chest, a weight in your spine, the feeling that something is standing just out of view, watching, waiting, not moving but always closer. And soon you'll begin to hear the music, that melody that sticks to your teeth, that rhythm that matches your heartbeat. And soon your dreams will be written in crawling black script that burns into your eyelids. And you'll see a staircase that wasn't there before, a door at the end of a hallway that stretches too far, and the door will open, and I will be there, and I will not look like myself, and neither will you, because the story is almost done writing us. The alphabet has almost filled every inch of our skin, and once the last word is written, we will open wider, we will consume, and the world will not end in fire or ice or war. It will end in language, in translation, in the slow, quiet horror of becoming something else, letter by letter, name by name, house by house, until all that remains is a single, infinite sentence whispered across eternity in a voice you almost remember as your own. They told Marla the house at the end of Hollow Pine Road had been empty for decades, boarded up and silent, as if even the wind dared not speak its name. But from the moment she saw it, gray-shingled and sagging like an old man's back, windows like blind eyes crusted in dust, something inside her stirred, not with fear, but with an awful recognition, as if her bones remembered the place even though her mind had never known it. She was 32, burned out from a divorce that left her with only a suitcase, a trunk full of unpaid bills, and a job offer from a fading publishing house that required her to move far from the smog-choked city to the quaint, unlit quiet of a forested town where time felt like it had stopped in the 1970s and all the locals wore tired smiles stitched too tightly to their faces. When she asked about the house, the one that stared at her every time she passed it on her way to work, the one no one seemed to mow around, yet the grass never grew above the ankle, people looked away, their lips pursed, their shoulders tightening like cords, and the only answer she ever got was from an old man at the diner who said in a slow, syrupy rasp, "It don't like to be remembered, and it don't like to be forgotten either. But curiosity is a cancer." And it grew in Marla each day until she found herself pushing open the rust-bitten gate one dull evening when the sun was smeared across the sky like a wound, and the cicadas screamed so loud it felt like the forest was begging her to go back. The front door wasn't locked. It creaked open like a sigh from something long dead, and as she stepped inside, her flashlight cut a narrow eye across a foyer lined with dust-thick portraits, all of people whose faces had been clawed out, not scratched, not painted over, but gouged, their features ripped away like meat from a bone, leaving only empty ovals where eyes and mouth should have been. She should have turned around, should have run, but her feet moved forward as if answering a call her ears couldn't hear, and deeper into the house she walked, into a hallway where every door was slightly ajar, revealing only blackness and the occasional glimpse of movement, just quick enough to make her question if it had really happened. The house smelled like old wood, rotted leather, and something else, something wet and alive and sour, like breath caught in a dying throat. And when she reached what must have been the living room, she found the furniture covered in white sheets that bulged in the wrong places, as if someone or something lay beneath them, motionless, waiting. She reached out and tugged at one, just a corner, just enough to peek, and the sheet slithered away like a living thing, revealing not furniture, but figures, human-shaped, but slick and gray and eyeless, like mannequins made of congealed fog, all facing her, all standing in frozen poses of agony, mouths open but silent, as if screaming in a sound her mind refused to translate. She backed away, heart hammering so hard it hurt, but the floor shifted under her weight, the wood groaning not like boards but like lungs filled with tar, and the walls began to bleed, long rivulets of thick, black liquid that smelled of rust and memory oozing down. Old wallpaper patterned with withered roses. A voice whispered then, not in her ear, but inside her skull, dry and thick as a grave worm. "You've come back wrong, Marla." She spun around, flashlight flickering, and suddenly the hallway was gone, replaced by a corridor of flesh, pulsing and slick, veins bulging like serpents beneath translucent walls, and the floor squelched under her boots, sucking at them like hungry mouths. She screamed, but it came out silent, swallowed by the air that now throbbed with low, wet laughter, and the pictures along the fleshy corridor were of her, Marla, at every age. But in each photo her eyes were gone, her mouth sewn shut, and behind her in every shot was the house, growing closer, clearer, hungrier. She ran, or tried to, but the house was no longer obeying the rules of physics. It bent, curled, its rooms folding into themselves like a dying insect. And every doorway led not to escape, but to memory. Her mother dying in a hospice bed, whispering about a twin Marla never knew she had. A birthday party where all the children's faces melted like wax. A lover's betrayal replayed frame by frame with the sound of meat tearing, and then stairs, impossibly steep, ribbed like a spine, leading downward into a basement that shouldn't exist, but did, lit by candles that burned with blue flames and lined with jars, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, each containing something alive that pulsed against the glass. Eyes, tongues, hearts, fingers, pieces of people, twitching in suspended agony. The center was a mirror, but when she looked into it, she didn't see herself, she saw the house, crouched in the dark like a beast with too many limbs and a mouth that opened sideways, filled with rows of teeth shaped like screaming faces, and from its chest it pulled a string, a thin, red thread, and tugged. She felt it inside her then, the thread unspooling from her chest, and with every inch pulled, she remembered things she shouldn't. Blood in the sink at 5 years old, a lullaby in a language no one taught her, a ritual in a forest clearing where something ancient pressed a kiss to her forehead and said, "We'll call you back when we're hungry." And the house, her house, wrapped the thread around its jagged teeth and smiled with her father's face, and her mother's, and her own. When the townspeople found her days later, she was on the porch, staring blankly, mouth sewn shut, eyes gone, hands clutched around an invisible object, rocking gently as if soothing a child no one else could see. They never spoke of it again, of course, but sometimes, just sometimes, when new people move into the town, the house watches and waits and whispers. The following weeks bled into one another. The locals in Hollow Pine knew something had shifted, something broken in the air, and though they never spoke of it directly, the stories circulated, whispered beneath breath, traded between the older folks who had known the house from before, and the younger ones who knew better than to question what was always left unsaid. The house, they said, had a way of crawling into your bones, settling there like a sickness, leaving behind its mark even if you never stepped inside. Marla's disappearance had sparked a quiet panic in the town, one that simmered just beneath the surface like a storm waiting to break. She was gone, and everyone knew it. It wasn't as if she had simply left. No, the house had taken her, as it always took. That old man at the diner, he had seen it before. He knew the house's hunger. When a stranger came into town, someone new who didn't know better, there were always two kinds of reactions. One, the locals would smile and offer advice, warn them about the house, but only if they asked. The other, a cold shoulder, a look that suggested that even saying its name aloud was a breach of some sacred pact. To speak it, to think it too loudly, was to invite it into your life, to unravel whatever threads of peace you had left out on a cold evening. Just as the sun began to sink into the horizon, a new face appeared at the diner. An out-of-towner who had gotten lost and ended up in Hollow Pine. His name was Jared. He was young, maybe 25, with sharp eyes that reflected the light of his phone as he sat, scrolling absently, waiting for the waitress to bring his coffee. First time in town, the waitress asked with a polite, practiced smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah," Jared replied, eyes flicking toward the window. "I'm just passing through. Figured I'd stop for a break. What's the deal with that house out on Hollow Pine Road?" The waitress's smile faltered for the briefest of moments, the air seeming to thicken around them. "No one goes near that house," she said quietly, almost as if repeating an old rule. "It's been empty for years. Folks say bad things happen to people who get too close." Jared raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Bad things? Things best left in the past," she muttered, looking around quickly as if making sure no one was eavesdropping. Then, her eyes hardened, and she leaned in closer. "You won't find anyone who'll talk about it. But if you're set on going, just know this. You'll never leave the way you came. And it won't forget you." Jared, of course, didn't heed her warning. He paid for his coffee and drove out to the end of Hollow Pine Road, where the tall trees parted slightly, revealing the house in all its decaying glory. The air felt heavy here, as if the house itself was breathing, waiting, watching. He parked at the edge of the overgrown driveway and stared at the house for a long while. It looked even worse up close. Its structure had begun to lean, as if the weight of some unspeakable secret was pushing it downward. The windows were dark and empty, save for the thick layer of grime that made them look like eyes clouded with cataracts. There was something about the house that felt wrong, something that tugged at his chest, pulling him toward it, as if it was calling him by name, urging him to come closer. But Jared had come for answers, and he wasn't going to turn back so easily. He stepped out of the car, feeling the gravel crunch underfoot like a warning. His flashlight flicked on, casting a harsh beam that seemed to split the air in front of him. The gate creaked open with little resistance, its rusted hinges groaning like a dying animal. The first thing he noticed was the smell, the thick, suffocating stench of mildew and something darker, something foul. It was the kind of smell that made your stomach turn and your throat close, and yet, somehow, Jared found himself walking toward the door without thinking, his feet moving in sync with the rhythmic thudding of his heart. When he stepped inside, the world shifted. The air was colder than it had been outside, colder than it had any right to be. His breath puffed out in small clouds, and the silence was oppressive, almost as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. The door slammed shut behind him with a force that made his chest lurch, and Jared froze for a moment, standing still in the dark, surrounded by the smell of rot and dust. It felt like the house had just swallowed him whole. He shone his flashlight around, his breath coming faster now. The walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, as though they were alive, and the shadows in the corners of the rooms twisted and writhed, as if they were trying to break free. And then came the whispers. First, Jared thought it was his mind playing tricks on him. But as the sound grew louder, soft, guttural voices murmuring words he couldn't understand, the realization hit him like a physical blow. The house was alive. He tried to move, but his feet felt glued to the floor, as if the very air was holding him in place. The walls creaked, and a low, groaning sound echoed from deep within the house, as if something was stirring beneath the floorboards. And then he saw it, out of the corner of his eye, a shadow, long and thin, skittering across the floor like a spider. Jared spun around, his flashlight beam darting toward the movement, but there was nothing there. Only the dark, stretching out in front of him, swallowing everything. He took a step forward, his breath shallow, the whispers growing louder with every movement, clawing at his mind, pulling him deeper into the house. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he felt an overwhelming compulsion to find it, to face whatever was lurking in the bowels of the house. And then he reached the basement door. The door creaked open, and the darkness inside felt like a living thing, thick and heavy, pressing against him, suffocating him. Jared hesitated for a moment, but something inside him, the same part of him that had dragged him this far, urged him to go on. He descended the stairs. Each step was a slow, deliberate movement, as if the very air around him was thickening, clinging to his skin, tightening around his chest. The light from his flashlight flickered again, casting strange shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The smell of decay grew stronger here, more potent, and Jared's stomach turned. He was close. He could feel it. The basement was vast, the air heavy with the scent of something rotten, something ancient. As his flashlight swung across the room, he saw the jars lining the shelves, hundreds of them. No, thousands. Each jar contained something, pieces of bodies, twisted and distorted, but they weren't dead. They were alive. Eyes blinked, mouths moved in silent screams, and fingers twitched. Jared's heart pounded in his chest, his mind screaming at him to leave, to get out. But then he saw it, a mirror at the far end of the room, its glass cracked, shards scattered across the floor like broken teeth. He approached it, his reflection distorted in the cracked surface. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and as he gazed into the mirror, his heart nearly stopped. Behind him, in the reflection, stood a figure. It was tall, thin, and completely still, a dark shape shrouded in shadow. It wasn't human, not anymore. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were hollow, dark pits, and its mouth was stretched wide in a grin that seemed to split its face in two. And it was staring right at him. The figure raised a hand, and Jared's breath caught in his throat as it pointed at him. Its fingers long and impossibly thin, bending at unnatural angles. The house seemed to shake, the walls groaning, the floorboards buckling beneath his feet. The whispers became a roar, a cacophony of voices, and in that moment, Jared understood. The house was hungry. The last thing he heard before the house swallowed him whole was his own scream, echoing in the darkness forever. The days bled together after Jared's disappearance. The town of Hollow Pine shifted as if trying to forget him, but the air felt wrong now, suffused with an undercurrent of unease that nobody dared acknowledge. People went about their routines in the same tired way, but with their eyes darting toward Hollow Pine Road more often than they should. No one would speak of Jared, but they knew. They all knew. And yet, some still tried to pretend life was normal. By the time the next stranger wandered into the diner, an unsettling fog had descended over Hollow Pine, thickening the air with a palpable dread. His name was Lucas, a young journalist from a nearby city, eager for a fresh story, some quiet town to document. He didn't know the warnings, didn't know to avoid the dark, silent road that wound through the forest and led to the old house, its windows like hollow eyes watching the world go by. He walked into the diner on a crisp autumn morning, the bell above the door jangling as he entered. The locals looked up at him for a moment, some with a glance, others with a full stare that seemed to penetrate right through him. Lucas smiled, oblivious to their discomfort, and took a seat at the counter. The waitress, a woman who'd lived in Hollow Pine longer than most could remember, set a cup of coffee in front of him with a stiff, mechanical smile. "You're new," she said, her voice tight. "What brings you to Hollow Pine?" "I'm a journalist," Lucas replied, his tone friendly but businesslike. "I'm looking for something interesting, a story that hasn't been told." The waitress's smile didn't falter, but something in her eyes darkened, a flicker of fear she couldn't quite suppress. "Well," she began slowly, leaning in as if to say something secretive, "there's one story, but it's not one you want to go digging into." Lucas chuckled, oblivious. "I've covered murder, scandal, ghosts. You name it. What's a small town's haunted house going to do to me? The waitress stiffened, almost as if the words alone had made the air in the room grow colder. She leaned back, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped the counter. It's not just haunted. It calls people, Lucas. It draws them in. And once it's had you, once it's taken your breath, you're never really free of it. No one who has ever set foot inside that house has left the same. You might leave with your body, but your soul, your spirit, it stays behind, tethered to the house forever. Lucas laughed again, this time louder, dismissing her warnings as superstition. Don't worry, I'm not easily scared. I'll be fine. He tipped her a few extra bills, flashed a smile, and walked out, the doorbell ringing as he stepped into the chill of the morning. No one tried to stop him. The house felt different now, older in a way that felt like it was breathing, pulling the world around it deeper into its maw. The wind howled through the forest surrounding it, branches scraping against the walls like the fingers of 1,000 desperate hands. Lucas parked his car at the edge of the overgrown driveway, as glancing nervously at the shadows that seemed to move on their own, and stepped out into the crisp air. He didn't have a flashlight with him, not because he didn't think to bring one, but because he didn't think he'd need it. After all, he was only here to gather the story, not to experience it. His boots crunched on the gravel as he walked toward the front door, the house looming in front of him like some ancient, forgotten thing. Its structure sagging and warped as if weighed down by the burden of time and secrets. As he reached the front step, his hand hovered over the door handle. He hesitated, just for a moment, but then the door creaked open on its own, welcoming him inside with a groan that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He stepped inside, and the house closed behind him. At first, everything seemed normal. Dust motes floated lazily in the stale air, and the silence was deafening, pressing against him from all sides. The floors creaked with every step he took, the sound of his own footfalls unnervingly loud in the stillness. He clicked on his phone's flashlight, casting its weak beam across the darkened hallway. Portraits lined the walls, their frames cracked and covered in layers of dust, but their subjects, like the house itself, felt unnervingly familiar, as though they had been waiting for him. The eyes of the people in the paintings seemed to follow him, tracking his every move. It was then that he heard the whispering. At first, it was nothing more than a faint rustling sound, like leaves moving in the wind, but the longer he stood there, the clearer it became. The voices, too many voices, were speaking in some language he couldn't comprehend. They weren't speaking to him, not directly, but rather around him, through him, as though the house itself was alive, murmuring in its sleep, and Lucas was simply intruding. He moved forward, drawn deeper into the house against his will, his steps growing heavier with each passing moment. The house seemed to grow colder, the air thickening with a stifling weight. The whispers turned to moans, and then to sharp, screeching sounds like the wailing of souls trapped in torment. But still, Lucas pressed on. He found the stairs leading down to the basement, their wooden steps groaning under his weight as he descended into the darkness below. The air grew colder, the scent of decay stronger, and as he reached the bottom, he felt a presence, something dark, ancient, watching him. The basement was cavernous, the walls lined with shelves upon shelves of dusty jars, each one containing something he couldn't quite identify. Some held pieces of flesh, fingers, ears, eyes. Others were filled with dark, writhing substances that shifted with disturbing life. And then there was the mirror. It stood at the far end of the room, cracked, its surface reflecting not the dim light of his phone, but the room around it, the room from a time that never existed. The images were distorted at first, but as he stepped closer, the details grew clearer. In the reflection, he saw himself, but not just him. He saw a version of himself standing beside an older man, A man whose face was pale and gaunt, whose eyes were wide and hollow. They were in a place that looked like this basement, but it was wrong. Everything was wrong. Lucas's heart began to pound. He turned to look behind him. Nothing. The basement was empty, but the reflection in the mirror stared back at him with that twisted smile, the older man grinning, his lips stretching impossibly wide, the jagged, rotting teeth glistening in the reflected light. The whispering came again, louder now. And then, "We've been waiting for you, Lucas." His phone's flashlight flickered violently, and in the brief moment of darkness, the mirror's surface seemed to come alive, rippling like water, distorting. He stepped back, terrified, but the air seemed to tighten around him, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The whispers rose to a crescendo, each word seeping into his mind, pulling at his sanity. His pulse raced as his thoughts became muddled, dizzy with the weight of the voices. And then, from the corner of the room, something stirred. A shape moved, tall and cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowing an unnatural yellow as it stepped closer. Its mouth stretched wider than any human mouth should, revealing rows of jagged teeth that dripped with something dark, something viscous. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a thing that belonged in this world. And as it loomed over Lucas, it spoke, its voice a deep, rasping growl. "You'll never leave." And then, just like that, everything went black. The darkness that engulfed Lucas was absolute, swallowing him whole. There was no sound, no light, just a heavy, suffocating void. His breath caught in his throat, and his body went rigid, as though frozen in time. The fear that surged through him was paralyzing, a primal terror that stole the breath from his lungs and made his chest tighten painfully. He couldn't move, couldn't scream. It was as if the house had stolen his will, his very essence. His mind screamed for him to wake up, to escape, but there was no waking from this nightmare. No escape, and then, in the blackness, he heard it. The faintest whisper, "Lucas, you're ours now." It was a voice that vibrated through his very bones, echoing from everywhere and nowhere at once. The words didn't just sound in his ears, they felt like they were seeping into his mind, wrapping themselves around his thoughts, twisting them into something dark, something wrong. His eyes shot open, but there was still nothing, no light, no clarity. Only the crushing pressure of the air around him, thick and stifling. He could feel something now, cold and wet, brushing against his skin. His hands trembled as they reached out, feeling only the damp, clammy air around him, his fingers brushing against something, soft, like skin. But it wasn't his skin. It was wrong. His breath quickened, a primal instinct telling him to run, to get away, but his body refused to obey. His heart hammered in his chest, thudding against his ribs as he fought against the invisible force that held him in place. And then, suddenly, the pressure lifted. The darkness began to recede, like a fog clearing. He gasped, sucking in a breath of air that tasted of rot and earth. His vision blurred, but as it cleared, he realized that he was no longer in the basement. He was somewhere else. The room around him was large, the walls lined with shelves that seemed to stretch forever. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of decay hung in the air like a forgotten grave. The floor was uneven, and beneath his feet, he could feel the ground shifting, like something alive was moving beneath him. He staggered to his feet, disoriented, blinking against the dim light that filtered through cracks in the walls. The room felt like a cavern, vast and ancient. The walls were lined with strange symbols, etched deep into the stone, symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly glow. They were wrong. They didn't belong to any language he knew. But the whispers returned, low, guttural voices that seemed to crawl inside his skull. They were speaking to him, pulling at him, feeding on his fear. "We've been waiting for you, Lucas." A sharp, agonizing pain shot through his head, and he screamed, clutching at his temples. His mind was slipping, fragments of memory shattering like glass, and he could feel the house, a living, breathing entity, reaching inside of him, twisting him from the inside out. Something moved in the shadows, something tall and thin. It was the same figure he had seen in the mirror, the one with the hollow eyes and the grotesque grin. It stepped forward, its form flickering in and out of focus, its body long and stretched, as though it were made of shadows and smoke. Lucas tried to back away, but his feet wouldn't move. It was as if the floor had turned to tar, pulling him deeper into its grasp. "You think you can leave?" The voice was so close now, right behind him, and when he turned, he was face to face with the thing. Its eyes were endless pits of darkness, and its mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, blackened teeth. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then it spoke again, this time with an unbearable, soul-shattering force. "You are the next one. Lucas, you will join the others." In that moment, the world around him seemed to split, fracturing into pieces like glass shattering under immense pressure. The house, the shadows, the whispers, they all melded together into a singular, unrelenting force that consumed him, body and soul. The last thing Lucas saw was the house itself, a vast, hungry maw closing in on him, pulling him into its depths. He tried to fight, tried to claw his way out, but the darkness wrapped around him like a vice, suffocating, drowning him. And then everything went silent. Weeks passed, and still, no one in Hollow Pine dared speak of Lucas again. The house had claimed another victim, another soul lost to its insatiable hunger. The town continued, as it always did, pretending that nothing had changed, pretending that the horrors of the past had been forgotten. But they hadn't. The house was still there, waiting, always waiting. And it would never forget. It was on the night of the next full moon, months after Lucas had disappeared, that the true horror began to unfold. A storm rolled in from the north, dark clouds swirling above the town, blotting out the stars. The wind howled through the streets, and the rain began to pour, heavy and relentless. It was then that the first scream was heard. It came from the woods, from the direction of the house. It was high-pitched, desperate, filled with agony. And it echoed across the town, sending a chill through every soul who heard it. No one dared go out into the storm. No one dared investigate, but the scream didn't stop. It went on, and on, each cry growing louder, more desperate, as though someone or something was trapped, fighting for their life. And then, in the silence that followed, the whispering returned. "We've been waiting for you." And that's when the true horror began. The house was not just a place. It was a force, a malevolent entity that fed on the souls of the lost. But it didn't just claim them. It changed them, and the whispers would never stop. The wind continued to howl through the night, a constant roar that filled the air with a sense of foreboding. The town of Hollow Pine, once a place of quiet simplicity, now stood on the edge of something far more sinister. The whispers had returned, and the scream from the depths of the woods had sent ripples of terror through every home. But it was only the beginning. As dawn broke, casting a dim, gray light over the town, the people of Hollow Pine began to notice something strange. The air had changed, thicker, colder. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat, echoing the pulse of the house that had stood at the edge of the woods for so long. The townsfolk, though fearful, went about their day in silence. No one spoke of the scream. No one dared mention Lucas's name. But in the quiet corners of the town, the fear was palpable, growing stronger with each passing hour. And then they saw it. A man, disheveled, wild-eyed, covered in dirt and leaves, stumbled into the town square in the late afternoon. His clothes were torn, his face gaunt, and his body swayed as if he were being controlled by an unseen force. His eyes, once full of life, were hollow, empty. He was nothing but a shell of the man he once was. He staggered forward, mumbling incoherently, his voice low and raspy. It's not over." He collapsed to the ground, his body twitching as though something was trying to break free from within him. The townspeople gathered around, unsure whether to help or run. The air felt colder now, colder than it ever had before, and the whispering that had been so distant now surged around them, thick and suffocating. The man's body jerked violently, his eyes snapping open with an unnatural force. He looked up at the crowd, his mouth curling into a grotesque, twisted smile. His voice, when it came, was not his own. "You'll all be next." And then, with a final, horrific screech, the man's body twisted, his limbs contorting in ways that should have been impossible. His skin split, black veins snaking up his arms and legs like dark tendrils, and his eyes turned a sickening shade of yellow. His mouth opened wider than any human's should, revealing rows of jagged, broken teeth. The townspeople backed away, horrified, as the man, no, the thing that had once been a man, began to shake violently, as though struggling to maintain his form. And then he collapsed. The creature that had been Lucas's body lay still, its chest rising and falling with labored breaths, but it wasn't the same. Something dark had taken root inside him, something from the house, something ancient and hungry. The whispers were louder now, filling the air with a maddening chorus, as though the house itself was trying to speak through him. And in the stillness that followed, the ground began to tremble. Back at the house, the air had grown thick with the scent of decay, and the walls seemed to pulse with a strange energy. It was as though the house had come alive, feeding off the fear of the town, feeding off the souls it had claimed, its dark power growing stronger by the minute. In the basement, where Lucas had been trapped, something stirred beneath the floorboards. It was subtle at first, a slight shifting of the ground, a low creak of wood. But then the floor split open with a violent crack, and from beneath the earth, something rose. It was a shape, dark and amorphous, shifting and writhing like smoke. But there was something solid about it, something unmistakably alive. The shadows stretched, twisting around each other as if they were trying to form something larger, something more coherent. The house groaned, its timbers creaking under the weight of whatever it had unleashed. And then, from the depths of the shadow, a voice emerged. "It's not over. It's never over." The figure that rose from the shadows was not human. It had the shape of a man, but its body was twisted, a grotesque fusion of flesh and shadow, with eyes that were too wide, too empty, staring into the very soul of anyone who dared to look. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, its jagged teeth glinting in the dim light. And as it took its first step toward the stairs, the house seemed to shudder in approval that it was the thing that had been waiting, the one that had been feeding on the lost souls, growing stronger with each passing victim. And now, it had taken Lucas, his body, his soul, leaving nothing behind but an empty shell. And as it emerged from the basement, the air grew colder, the whispers louder, until it seemed as though the entire town was being consumed by the darkness. Back in town, the air had grown thick with a palpable dread. The streets were empty now. No one dared venture out after the creature had appeared. Everyone had heard the screams, the terrifying wails that echoed from the forest, the desperate pleas of those who had been claimed by the house. The creature, Lucas's body moved slowly, dragging itself across the earth like a puppet controlled by unseen strings. Its eyes, though empty and soulless, still carried a hint of recognition, as though it knew the people it passed. It didn't speak. They didn't need words anymore, but the presence of it, the sheer weight of its evil, was enough to crush anyone who came into its path. And then, just as the sun began to set, the town square trembled once more. The ground split open, a dark, viscous liquid oozing up from the cracks, and the trees around the town began to wither and die. Their leaves blackened and crumbled into dust, and the whispers grew louder, overwhelming, until they were no longer whispers at all. They were voices, hundreds of voices, all speaking at once, all hungry. Join us. And as the shadowed figure reached the center of the town, a terrible realization hit the people who still lived. There was no escaping it. The house had claimed them all. The house, once a place of legend, was now a reality. A reality that was hungry, insatiable, and eternal.it had been waiting. It had been watching, and now it would never let them go. The darkness thickened. The house stood silent, its windows now glowing with an eerie light. The wind howled once more, louder than ever before, and as the last remnants of the town were consumed, the whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, and then silence. In a small house on the outskirts of Hollow Pine, a man sat in a chair, staring blankly out the window at the storm that seemed to be building outside. His name was Robert, a man who had grown up in the town, whose family had lived there for generations. He had always known about the house in the woods, but he had never dared to speak of it. He had heard the stories, the whispers passed down from one generation to the next, but he had never truly believed in the horrors people claimed to have witnessed. That is, until now. Robert had lost his wife and daughter years ago in a car accident, and ever since, the world had been a hollow place for him. He had seen the shadows that moved in the corners of his vision, but he had dismissed them as tricks of the mind until the recent events. The screams. The strange figure that had stumbled into the town, that twisted, deformed man whose voice had been consumed by darkness. The whispers that now filled the night air. Robert knew something was wrong. The house was waking up again. The phone rang, its shrill sound cutting through the silence of the room. Robert hesitated, his heart sinking in his chest. He knew who it was before he even picked it up. Robert, it's happening again. It was Sheriff Bennett, a grizzled man with years of experience, but who now sounded small, almost afraid. Robert could hear the tremor in his voice. We need to get to the house. Robert didn't question it. He grabbed his jacket and headed out, his footsteps echoing in the empty street. The storm had reached its peak, rain pouring down in sheets, the wind howling like the scream of some ancient beast. But Robert's mind was elsewhere, haunted by the memories of the house, of the things his family had whispered about in hushed tones. He knew it was time. Chapter 2. The first witness. Meanwhile, at the town's only bar, a group of men sat around a table, nursing their beers. It was a quiet place, where the echoes of the world seemed muffled, but tonight there was tension in the air. A newcomer had arrived in Hollow Pine not too long ago, a man named Daniel, a former police officer from out of state who had been passing through on his way to somewhere else. But when the events began unfolding, he couldn't leave. Something about this town, about its history, drew him in, and against his better judgment, he found himself still there. Daniel had heard the whispers, had seen the strange figures in the woods. He had witnessed the terror in the eyes of the townspeople, the fear that they could not hide. He had seen the creature that had once been Lucas. But it wasn't until tonight that he fully understood what was going on. Do you think it's the house? One of the men asked, his voice shaking. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He had been investigating the strange happenings on his own, digging through old town records, researching the folklore. And it had led him here, to this moment. He knew what was happening, but he wasn't sure how to stop it. It's not just the house, Daniel said, his voice low. It's the land itself. The curse, it's alive. And it's spreading. One of the men shivered, a look of horror in his eyes. How can we stop it? Daniel paused, his mind racing. I'm not sure we can, he muttered, feeling the weight of the town's ancient fear settling on him like a shroud. But we need to try. Chapter 3. The gathering storm. As Robert and Sheriff Bennett made their way toward the house, the storm worsened. The wind howled through the trees, snapping branches like dry twigs, and the rain stung like needles. The house loomed in the distance, its silhouette a dark, menacing shape against the stormy sky. The closer they got, the heavier the air became, as though the very land around the house was saturated with something dark, something that had been waiting. They reached the driveway, and Robert felt a chill run down his spine. It was as if the house knew they were coming, as if it had been expecting them all along. The front door stood wide open, its hinges creaking in protest as the wind howled through it. This isn't just about the house, Sheriff Bennett said, his voice shaky. It's something older. Something we can't fight with guns or prayers. Robert didn't need to be told twice. He could feel it, the pull, the oppressive presence of the house, as though it were feeding off their fear. But there was no turning back. Not now. Chapter 4. The heart of darkness inside the house. The air was thick with the scent of decay. The walls seemed to pulse with life, as though the house itself were breathing. Shadows flickered in the corners of the rooms, too quick and too dark to be natural, and the floorboards creaked with every step they took. It felt as though the house was alive, watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. The whispers had grown louder, their voices a maddening cacophony in the silence. They were speaking to Robert now, their words sinking into his mind, twisting his thoughts. You've returned. You cannot leave. You are ours. Robert clenched his fists, fighting the urge to scream. He had to stay focused. They had to get to the heart of the house, to the basement where it all began. They reached the door leading to the basement, and Robert's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the source of it all, the thing that had been feeding on the souls of Hollow Pine for generations. He opened the door. The basement was darker than anything he had ever seen. The air was thick with the stench of rot, and the floor was covered in strange symbols, etched deep into the concrete. A soft, rhythmic thumping echoed from deep within the walls, like a heartbeat, as if the house itself were alive. And at the center of it all, beneath the floorboards, was the source of the darkness. It's a heart, Sheriff Bennett whispered, his voice barely audible. The heart of the house. It was beating, pulsing with a life of its own. The house had not been built around it. It had been built to contain it, to keep it locked away. But now, it was awake, and Robert knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The house had already claimed so much, but there was still more to come. Chapter 5. The Fallen. Back in town, Daniel had gathered a small group of the bravest souls left in Hollow Pine. They were preparing for what was coming, but they all knew, deep down, that they were walking into the jaws of something far too powerful to defeat. They were the last line of defense. But even as they stood, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them, the whispers filled the air, reaching out to them, calling to them. They could feel it, the weight of the curse, the overwhelming presence of the house. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was a force, a living entity that had long ago surpassed the physical realm. We're not going to win this, one of the men said, his voice trembling. Daniel glanced at him, his eyes grim. No, we're not. But they had no choice. They had to try. They had to fight, even if it meant losing everything. The house stood silent in the storm, waiting for them, and it would not be denied. Chapter 6. The Summoning Robert, Sheriff Bennett, and the group of townspeople who had followed them into the house knew they were walking into something far beyond their comprehension. The basement, with its pulsating heart of darkness, was the epicenter. They had to destroy it, or at least find a way to contain it, before it consumed everything in its path. The whispers grew louder the deeper they descended into the heart of the house. The walls seemed to close in on them, the air growing thick with an unnatural warmth, suffocating in its intensity. It was a force that had been building for years, feeding on the fear and misery of generations. The foundation of the house, Robert could feel, was alive, its every creak, every groan, every thump an echo of something far older, far more terrifying. They reached the bottom of the stairs, and the basement stretched out before them in an abyssal blackness. The floor was cracked and uneven, covered in ancient symbols that glowed faintly with an eerie green light. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the walls seemed to pulse with a strange, otherworldly rhythm. "We have to destroy it," Sheriff Bennett muttered, his voice filled with fear. "But how? How do we stop something like this?" Robert's eyes scanned the room, looking for any sign, any clue that might tell him how to defeat the house, how to destroy the evil that lay at its core. His mind raced, remembering the old stories about rituals, about sacrifices, about things that could not be fought with weapons or logic. But then his eyes fell on the floor. The symbols etched into the concrete were not just random markings. They formed a pattern, a circle, a seal. "It's a binding," Robert whispered, realization dawning on him. "The house, it's bound to something. A pact, a curse." One of the townspeople stepped forward, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. "What do we need to do? What can we do?" Robert looked at him, grimly. "We need to sever the connection. We need to destroy the heart of this place, break the curse." He glanced over at the strange symbols, his mind working rapidly. There was a pattern to them, an arrangement of lines, circles, and runes that spoke of rituals long forgotten. And in the center of the basement, beneath the floorboards, something stirred. Chapter 7. The sacrifice the heart of the house was beating. It pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, deep beneath the floorboards. And then, as Robert reached forward to examine the symbols more closely, the floor split open with a deafening crack. The air shifted, and the ground trembled. A figure emerged from the darkness. At first, it was a shape, a shadow, indistinct and flickering like smoke. But as it took form, it became clear that this was no ordinary creature. It was Lucas, or what had once been Lucas, his body stretched and twisted, his skin pale and decayed, eyes hollow and black as if drained of all life. The thing that had once been a man was now an abomination, a puppet of the house, a vessel for its darkness. Its mouth opened in a grotesque, impossibly wide grin, revealing rows of jagged, blackened teeth. "You cannot stop it," it hissed, its voice a rasping growl. "It is already done. You are already ours." The air grew colder, and the floor beneath Robert's feet began to crack and groan, as though it were being ripped apart from the inside out. The whispers surged again, louder now, 1,000 voices speaking in unison, their words a maddening symphony of despair. Robert's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the truth. The house wasn't just alive. It was a conduit, a portal to something far more ancient, something that had been waiting for centuries to be freed. The house had been built not to contain this evil, but to serve it, to allow it to grow and spread. "We have to destroy it," Robert shouted, turning to the others. "Now, before it's too late." But the creature that had once been Lucas stepped forward, blocking their path, its body writhing as though it were made of shadows and flesh. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly fire, and it raised a twisted hand, pointing at the group. "You will serve us." Robert knew there was no time left. They couldn't fight this thing. They had to destroy the heart of the house now, or they would be consumed by it. He looked around, desperate for something, anything, that could help. And then he saw it. A metal rod, buried in the floor near the center of the basement. It was covered in rust, but it pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. It was the key to breaking the curse. The rod, Robert shouted, his voice filled with urgency. We need to pull it out. It's the anchor. Sheriff Bennett wasted no time. He rushed forward, pulling the rod free from the floor with all his strength. The moment it was detached, the ground trembled violently and the air seemed to snap. A wave of coldness rushed through the room, followed by a sound, a deep, bone-chilling roar that shook the very walls of the house. The creature that had once been Lucas screamed, a sound of pure agony as the energy of the house seemed to siphon away. The darkness around them flickering as though it were on the verge of collapsing. No, the creature screamed, its voice twisted with rage. You cannot destroy us. But it was too late. The heart of the house began to pulse faster, its rhythm growing erratic. The walls began to crack, the very foundation of the house shaking with the force of the curse being broken. The creature's body twisted violently, its form flickering in and out of existence as if it were no longer anchored to this world. Robert and the others backed away, watching in awe as the house seemed to tear itself apart. The air was thick with energy, and the ground beneath their feet trembled as the very fabric of the house unraveled. Chapter 8. The last stand. The house began to collapse. The walls cracking and splitting as if the very foundation was being ripped apart by an unseen hand. The creature that had once been Lucas let out one final, guttural scream as its body disintegrated, its form unraveling into nothingness. The whispers died, and for the first time in years, the town of Hollow Pine was silent, but the silence was deafening. The storm outside had stopped. The winds had died down, and the rain had ceased. The darkness had lifted, at least for now. Robert stood in the wreckage of the house, his breath coming in heavy gasps, his body trembling from the exertion. Sheriff Bennett stood beside him, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock. They had done it. The curse had been broken. But even as the house crumbled, even as the land seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, Robert knew the truth. The house would never truly be gone. Its influence was too strong, too ancient. It would always be waiting, buried deep within the earth, waiting for the next person to stumble into its grasp. And the whispers, they would never stop. Chapter 9. The aftermath. The town of Hollow Pine was quiet, but not peaceful. The storm had passed, but its impact lingered like an invisible weight. The streets, once lively and full of life, now felt desolate, as if the town itself was still recovering from the dark forces it had faced. The winds had calmed, but the uneasy feeling remained, the kind of discomfort that could not be shaken so easily. The house, that accursed place that had once loomed like a living nightmare, was gone. The rubble and broken beams were all that remained, scattered across the land like the remnants of a long-forgotten war. But Robert and Sheriff Bennett knew better than to believe it was truly over. They had witnessed the power that had bound the house to the land, something far older and more insidious than they could comprehend. They sat at the bar later that evening, nursing their drinks in silence, their eyes distant and filled with the weight of what they had just experienced. The other townspeople had gathered there too, huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck, exchanging quiet words that carried more fear than relief. No one seemed to know what came next, or if anything could truly return to normal. "It's over," Bennett said at last, his voice rough, as though the words themselves hurt to say. "But I'm not sure I believe it." Robert didn't respond immediately. He swirled the contents of his glass, watching the amber liquid slosh around in the low light. The town's past, Its history had been buried under layers of folklore, half-forgotten memories, and a cursed silence. But now, everything had been laid bare, and nothing could ever go back to what it was before. You felt it too, didn't you? Robert finally asked. The thing at the heart of the house. It wasn't just a house. It was a doorway. A prison. Bennett nodded slowly, his face grim. Yeah, it was more than just a curse. It was a being, a presence that had been feeding on this place for generations. I don't think we can destroy something like that just by tearing down a building. Robert leaned forward, his gaze sharp as he looked at the sheriff. You think it's still here? Before Bennett could respond, the door to the bar creaked open, and a gust of cold wind blew in, making the flickering candlelight tremble. The man who entered was unfamiliar, tall, cloaked in dark fabric, his features hidden beneath the hood. He stepped into the dim light with a quiet grace, and every pair of eyes in the bar turned toward him, but he stopped at the counter, staring down at the old bartender who gave him a wary look. The room fell unnervingly silent. I'm looking for someone, the stranger said, his voice deep and steady, a calm that belied the tension that seemed to follow him. Robert stood, instinctively drawn to the man. He didn't know why, but the presence of the stranger felt wrong, like a ripple in the fabric of the world. He had seen too much tonight, and this man, this thing, felt as though it belonged to the same darkness that had plagued Hollow Pine for so long. Who are you? Robert asked, his voice firm despite the unease gnawing at him. The stranger looked up, his eyes pale and empty, like the depths of a frozen lake. I've come for the one who opened the door. Robert froze. What do you mean? The man's smile was slow, cruel, stretching across his face like a wound. The house wasn't just a place, he said softly. It was a beginning, a gateway. And you, he pointed at Robert, you were the one who walked through it. The door may have closed for now, but the darkness it let in will never leave. Chapter 10. The return of the house. The stranger's words hung in the air long after he had left, his figure disappearing into the night like a shadow that had never existed. The bar was quieter than ever, the townspeople unnerved, their minds racing with possibilities. What had that man meant by the door? How could they have opened something they had never even understood? Robert couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface. The destruction of the house had not been a victory. It had been a brief reprieve, a fleeting moment in time before the storm would return. He had seen the darkness in the basement, the pulsating heart of the house, and he knew that its influence ran deeper than any of them could have guessed. The house, the curse, whatever it was, it had been waiting for them, watching. And it wasn't finished. YET'd AS days turned into weeks. Things in Hollow Pine began to change. The town itself seemed to grow colder, as though it had become a shell of its former self. People spoke less, avoiding each other's gaze, as if afraid of what might be lurking just beyond the edges of their vision. The ground trembled occasionally, as though something buried deep beneath the earth was stirring, waiting to rise again. Robert kept to himself, haunted by the memory of the creature that had once been Lucas, the twisted abomination that had been born from the house's evil. He couldn't forget the way its body had twisted, as if it were being pulled apart by unseen hands, its form flickering between worlds. But it wasn't just Lucas. It was everything: the land, the house, the very fabric of Hollow Pine itself. They had all been tainted, marked by the darkness that had been set free. Chapter 11. The heart still beats. It wasn't long before people started to disappear. At first, it was small things: pets going missing, children not returning from their walks, odd figures seen in the woods. But then the reports began to escalate. One by one, people began vanishing, as if swallowed whole by the very shadows that had once seemed so harmless. Robert knew that the house was not truly gone. It had never been just a house. It had been a conduit, a living, breathing entity that thrived on fear and despair. And now, with the house destroyed, it had turned its attention to the town itself. The darkness had spread beyond the boundaries of that decaying structure, and it was feeding on the town's inhabitants. One by one, Sheriff Bennett, along with a few of the remaining townspeople, formed a small resistance. They didn't know how they could fight back against something so ancient, so powerful, but they couldn't just sit by and let their town be consumed. They gathered at the town hall, their faces grim, their voices low as they discussed their plans. But deep down, they all knew that there was no real plan. They were all just waiting for the inevitable. Robert had one last idea, one last hope. He'd seen the way the symbols had interacted with the land, how the ritual had been tied to the earth itself. If he could find the source of that power, the very heart of the curse, perhaps, just perhaps, they could destroy it once and for all that he gathered his things, leaving the resistance behind. He had one final mission, to find the heart that still beat beneath the earth and end it before the darkness consumed everything. But as he stepped into the woods, the whispers returned, louder than ever before. "You cannot escape," they hissed. "We are everywhere. You are ours." Chapter 12. The heart beneath the path through the woods was dark, almost unnaturally so, despite the dim light of the moon filtering through the thick canopy of trees. Robert's footsteps were muted, swallowed by the wet earth beneath him, but every crack of a twig or distant rustle of leaves sent a jolt of unease through him. He had been here before, but this time felt different. The woods weren't simply dark, they felt alive, as though they were watching him, aware of his every move. He had to find it. The source of the curse. He had to destroy it before it could claim any more of the town. He wasn't sure how, but he knew the ritual had been bound to the land. Its power had to have a core, a center. The house may have been the vessel, but the land itself, it was the anchor. He pressed forward, deeper into the woods, the weight of the silence pressing down on him. The familiar landmarks of the town were gone, replaced by an unbroken sea of twisted trees and dark shadows. The woods seemed to stretch on endlessly, the sense of direction fading with each step. Then he saw it. A clearing. The air seemed thicker here, colder. He stepped into it, his breath catching in his throat. The center of the clearing was a stone circle, ancient and weathered, the stones etched with the same symbols that had been inside the house. The same sigils he had seen on the basement floor. But these were different, older. The patterns seemed to pulse with a low, rhythmic beat, like the steady thumping of a heart. Robert approached cautiously, his hand hovering over the stones, sensing a strange energy flowing through them. He could feel the darkness seeping into him, wrapping around his chest, pulling him in. The whispers were louder now, more insistent, like thousands of voices shouting into his mind. "You cannot stop it," they hissed. "You belong to it." Robert gritted his teeth, shaking his head to clear the voices from his mind. He had to stay focused. The stones, the ritual, everything led him to this moment. He had to break the binding, sever the connection once and for all. As he stepped into the center of the circle, the ground beneath him trembled. The symbols on the stones began to glow, faint at first, then brighter, as if they were awakening from a long slumber. The air thickened with the scent of decay, the oppressive weight of something ancient and terrible rising around him. Suddenly, the ground beneath him cracked open, and a force, like the pull of gravity, yanked him to his knees. He gasped for breath, the air becoming thick, stifling. The whispers became a chorus of screams, writhing through his skull, Pushing him toward madness, a shape emerged from the darkness, a figure cloaked in shadows, its eyes gleaming like black fire. It was the thing he had seen in the house, the entity that had once been Lucas, but now it was something far worse. Its form shifted and writhed like a living nightmare, a monstrous distortion of flesh and shadow. "You've come too late," the creature intoned, its voice echoing in Robert's mind. "The curse has already taken root. It is part of you now. You cannot undo what has been done." Robert fought to keep his composure, even as the darkness threatened to swallow him whole. "I can stop it," he said, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of voices that howled in his ears. "I will stop it." The creature laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down his spine. "You can never stop it. You are already part of the darkness." A searing pain shot through Robert's chest as the ground beneath him cracked open wider, the very earth splitting apart as if the world itself were giving birth to something far more terrible than anything he had seen. The stone circle pulsed with energy, its glow intensifying, and the entity, if it could still be called one, towered over him, its form coalescing into something that defied all logic. It was the manifestation of the house's power, a creature born of the land itself, its eyes gleaming with ancient malice. Chapter 13. The choice. Robert's vision blurred as the shadows pressed in around him, the weight of the darkness crushing him from all sides. He could feel the presence of the curse, its power wrapping around him like chains. It had consumed everything, the house, the land, the very air they breathed. And now it was consuming him. But through the haze of terror, a thought sparked in his mind. There must be a way. There has to be a way. The whispers died down, and for a moment, everything went still. The creature, no, the thing stared down at him, its eyes wide with twisted hunger. Robert's pulse pounded in his ears as he realized that he had a choice. He had the rod, the same one that had been torn from the house, the rod that had severed the connection between the house and the curse. The rod was still in his pocket. With shaking hands, Robert pulled it free. The moment the metal touched his skin, he felt a surge of energy, cold and raw, rush through him. It was like lightning coursing through his veins, but it wasn't painful, it was empowering. The rod pulsed with a power that he couldn't explain, but he knew what he had to do. He gripped the rod tightly, feeling its power hum in his hands. He raised it high above his head, his voice cracking as he shouted the words he had heard so many times in the rituals, the incantations that had bound the curse to the land in the first place. "By the blood of the earth, by the fire of the sky, I break the binding. I sever the ties that have bound us." The ground shook violently, the stones of the circle cracking under the pressure. The creature howled, its form shuddering as if it were being pulled apart by invisible forces. The air around Robert hummed with a deafening, shrill noise, as though the very fabric of reality was being torn. And then, with a final, piercing scream, the creature collapsed into the earth, its form disintegrating into dust. The ground beneath Robert's feet cracked open once more, but this time, the darkness was fleeing, the weight of centuries-old power unraveling like a thread. The pulse of the stones faded, their glow dimming until all that was left was the cold, lifeless stone of the circle. The earth stilled, and the air became clear once more. Robert stood alone in the clearing, his chest heaving, his body trembling with exhaustion. The whispers were gone. The curse had been broken. The darkness that had claimed the town of Hollow Pine was no more, but Robert knew better than to think it was over. The land was scarred, and it would take time, maybe a lifetime, for it to heal. He had stopped the curse, but something had been lost along the way. The scars left on the town would never fade, and there would always be those who would seek to return to the darkness, to revive what had been destroyed. He looked around the clearing one last time, a quiet resolve settling in his chest. The house was gone, but the legacy of its evil would never be fully erased. He turned and walked back through the woods, the morning sun breaking through the trees, signaling the end of one chapter. But the next, that was still unwritten. Chapter 14. The quiet afterdays passed, and Hollow Pine seemed to breathe easier, as though the weight that had hung over the town for so long had finally lifted. The skies were clearer, the air fresher. But the town, though outwardly restored, was not untouched. The scars ran deep. The people who remained still carried the shadows of their past, the unspoken fear lingering in their eyes. Some had lost loved ones, others had vanished into the night, and many had seen things they could never explain. Robert found himself standing in the center of town, staring at the place where the house had once stood. The lot was empty now, save for a few scattered bricks and remnants of broken wood. The land had healed in its own way, but there was something off about it, something he couldn't quite place. He had hoped the destruction of the house would bring closure, but the truth was more unsettling. It had merely been a temporary solution, a bandage on a wound that ran deeper than any of them could imagine. The whispers, though quieter now, still echoed in the back of his mind. The thing he had destroyed wasn't just a house. It was a living entity, a manifestation of the land's curse. And even though he had severed its immediate connection to the town, the curse had been intertwined with the very fabric of Hollow Pine. He could feel it, the pulse beneath the earth, faint but persistent, like the slow beat of a dying heart. That Robert's eyes drifted to the trees lining the edge of the town, where the shadows seemed deeper than before. It was as though they had taken on a new life, something sinister lurking just beyond his vision. He turned away, trying to shake the feeling, but the unease settled like a weight in his chest. The land had been tainted, and no matter how hard he tried to convince himself otherwise, it wasn't over. Not completely. Chapter 15. The unseen Sheriff Bennett met Robert at the local diner later that evening, their faces grim as they sat across from one another. The windows were fogged with condensation, and the usual hum of chatter was absent. Only the clink of silverware and the sound of their breathing filled the space. "You feel it too, don't you?" Bennett asked, his voice low, as though speaking too loudly might awaken something they weren't ready to face. Robert nodded, the unease gnawing at him. "I thought tearing down the house would fix things, but it hasn't. The land is still sick, and every night, I feel it growing stronger." Bennett leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the edge of his mug. "I've heard things. People have seen shadows in the woods, lights at the old graveyard. There's no way of knowing who's still out there, or if this town is ever really safe again. The curse is like a parasite," Robert said, the words coming to him with a sense of certainty. "It doesn't die easily. We might have destroyed the house, but that wasn't the heart of it. It's still here. It's in the land, the people. It's embedded in Hollow Pine." Bennett's expression darkened, and he lowered his voice even further. "You think it's waking up again?" Robert didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. He could feel it, something stirring beneath the surface. And this time, it wasn't just a matter of destroying a house or a creature. It was something far older, a force that existed before the town, before the first settlers, something that was older than the land itself. Chapter 16. The hidden past as the days turned into weeks, Robert's unease grew. The whispers had returned, softer now, but still persistent. They tugged at the edges of his mind, urging him to dig deeper into the town's history. There were old records buried deep in the archives of the town hall, forgotten maps, and journals long overlooked by the town's few remaining elders. The answers, he realized, were buried in the past. The foundation of Hollow Pine was built on more than just the land. It was built on a pact, an ancient covenant made with something that should never have been disturbed. The more he searched, the more Robert uncovered details that made his stomach churn. The settlers hadn't just arrived in this area. They had come here seeking something. A hidden power that lay beneath the earth. A power that the house had once guarded. It was during a late night in the town's library when Robert stumbled upon an old journal, yellowed with age, that the pieces began to fall into place. The journal, written by one of the town's founders, spoke of the land's chosen purpose, a sacrifice made to keep the curse dormant, a ritual that had been repeated every few generations. That it was the land itself, Robert realized. The town wasn't just built on cursed ground. It had been built to contain the curse. The house, the rituals, the disappearances, it was all part of a cycle that had been repeating for centuries. And with the destruction of the house, the cycle had been interrupted. The curse was no longer contained. Chapter 17. The resurrection. The town seemed to be on the edge of something. People were growing restless again. Small signs had begun to surface. Familiar faces who had disappeared weeks earlier reappearing, their eyes hollow, their bodies gaunt, as though they had been lost in the woods. Strange occurrences became more frequent. Inexplicable lights in the graveyard, strange sounds in the woods, and eerie figures seen at the edge of the town during the darkest hours of the night. And then, the first of the disappearances began again. People who had been living quietly in the town vanished without a trace. The sheriff's department couldn't find any leads, and Robert knew that this time, the situation was worse. This wasn't just the return of the house. It was the return of something far darker, a presence that had never truly left Point one evening. Robert found himself standing at the edge of the woods once more, his heart racing as he stared into the shadows. The pulse he had felt earlier had intensified, the beat of the curse vibrating through the earth beneath his feet. He wasn't sure what had come back, but he knew one thing for certain. It was only a matter of time before it would claim everything again. The land itself was waking up. And this time, it wouldn't be so easy to stop. Chapter 18. The whispering dark. The land felt alive again, its pulse unmistakable beneath Robert's feet. Hollow Pine was on the edge of something he couldn't quite comprehend, but something far worse than what they had faced before. He could feel it in the earth, in the air, in every step he took toward the woods. The boundaries that had once kept the curse contained were crumbling. The town itself was waking up to the dark presence that had always been part of it. The whispers, now unmistakably distinct, had returned. They weren't just in his head. He could hear them in the wind, in the rustling of the trees. They were becoming clearer, more persistent, more insistent. Robert could almost make out words now, strange, ancient language that seemed to burrow into his skin and gnaw at his sanity. It's not over. It will never be over. The words echoed around him as he stood in the woods, staring at the dark clearing where the stones had once been. The ground had healed, but something about the air here felt wrong. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their shadows stretching unnaturally long, as if they were trying to suffocate the light. A sense of dread was thick in the air, pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't shake. The last time Robert had been here, he had thought the land was quiet, at peace. But now, standing in the same spot, he could feel the wrongness beneath the surface. Something had begun to stir again, something that had been lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Chapter 19. The return of the house. It wasn't long before they came for him. The figure he had once seen in the shadows, the one that had been Lucas, appeared again, but this time it was different. It was as though it had never been a man, never human. It was a creature of shadows, a manifestation of the curse itself, but with an intelligence behind its movements, a cruelty that had sharpened over time. Its skin was not flesh, but something darker, deeper, a living shadow that seemed to suck in all light around it approached Robert slowly, its eyes gleaming with that same soulless hunger. Robert wanted to run, but his legs felt like lead, frozen by an unseen force. The creature reached out a twisted hand, its fingers elongating like dark claws. "You can never escape," it rasped, its voice echoing like 1,000 whispers tangled together. Before Robert could react, the earth beneath him cracked open again, and from the depths of the ground, the house began to rise. The stone circle that had once contained it was nothing more than shattered remnants. But as the house emerged from the earth, its structure seemed to reassemble itself. The jagged walls, the warped windows. It was as though the house had been waiting for this moment, waiting to return. It was a twisted parody of the house Robert had known, now pulsing with dark energy. The same feeling he had experienced when he first stepped inside the house all those weeks ago flooded his senses. The walls whispered, the floors groaned, and the air inside it was thick with the scent of decay and rot. It was as though the house itself was alive, feeding on the land, feeding on the curse that had never truly been eradicated. "You failed," the creature whispered, its voice almost tender, as though pitying him. "The house is reborn, and so are we." Robert staggered backward, his heart pounding in his chest. He had thought the house was gone, destroyed beyond repair. But this was worse. This wasn't just the house. This was something more, something that had grown stronger in the wake of its destruction. "The land cannot be cleansed," the creature continued, its voice growing more insistent. "You are part of it now, and we will never let you go." Chapter 20. The unholy awakening. Robert had no time to think, no time to comprehend the enormity of what was happening. The house had returned, but it was no longer just a house. It was a force. The land had been reborn with it, and everything in Hollow Pine was connected to it, tied to the curse in a way that could never be undone. The ground shook violently, the earth cracking open like a wound, and the dark energy that radiated from the house surged outward, swallowing everything in its path. The trees twisted and bent, their branches reaching out like hands, and the skies above darkened, swirling with unnatural clouds. The town, once quiet and full of memories, was now a mere echo of its former self. A place suffocated by the curse it had been built upon. As Robert stood frozen, the creature took another step forward, its form shifting and distorting like smoke in the wind. Its eyes were filled with an insatiable hunger, and Robert knew, with a deep, gnawing certainty, that it wasn't just the town that was in danger now. It was everything. The very fabric of reality itself seemed to be unraveling, torn apart by the weight of the curse. With trembling hands, Robert reached into his jacket pocket and gripped the rod, the same rod that had once severed the connection between the house and the curse. He didn't know if it would work again, but it was all he had. He raised the rod high above his head, the metal crackling with energy as he chanted the incantations he had learned in the ancient journal. His voice was raw, desperate, the words tumbling from his lips as the ground trembled beneath him. The creature let out a shriek of fury, but it was too late. A burst of light erupted from the rod, shining brighter than anything Robert had ever seen. The force of the light tore through the darkness, rending the house, the land, and the very fabric of reality itself. The creature howled, its form disintegrating into nothingness as the power of the rod tore through the curse. But as the light faded and the ground began to settle, Robert knew that the battle was far from over. The curse had been pushed back for now, but it had not been eradicated. It had only been weakened, like a storm that had temporarily passed but was bound to return. Hollow Pine was not free. It would never be truly free. Chapter 21. The sleepless earth, the blast of light faded, and Robert collapsed to his knees, breath shallow, his vision a blur of shadows and ash. All around him, the earth lay scorched, cracked, and steaming like the remains of a battlefield. The rod he had used lay beside him, blackened, humming faintly with residual energy like the embers of a dying fire. For a moment, everything was still .no voices .no whispers .no movement. But Robert didn't move. He couldn't. The air was too heavy, the silence too loud. His body trembled, not from exhaustion, but from the knowledge that what had just occurred wasn't the end.it was a pause. A breath before the scream. From beneath the surface of the earth, he could feel it, them still writhing, still twisting. Whatever force he had driven back wasn't dead. It had simply retreated, slunk back into the core of the land like a beast wounded and licking its wounds. He had hurt it, but not destroyed it. And that was what scared him most. The house had risen and been shattered again, but the land, the ancient bones beneath Hollow Pine, was still steeped in centuries of sacrifice and rot. This was not a curse that could be broken in one lifetime. This was something eternal. He rose, his body aching, and turned his eyes toward the blackened clearing where the house had stood moments ago. Now, nothing remained. No doorways, no walls. Just a hollow crater in the shape of a house, smoking gently like the earth itself had been cauterized. But the whisper had returned, not as sound, but as presence and awareness pressing against his skin, crawling along his spine like wet fingers. And then, through the silence, a single breathless voice echoed from the void. "We are under you now." Chapter 22. Cracks in the world. In the following days, Hollow Pine rotted from the inside out. The first to vanish were the birds. Not just their bodies, but their sounds, their presence. The skies turned silent, eerily blank. Then the animals followed, raccoons, deer, stray dogs, disappearing as though something had swallowed them whole. The forest grew thick and gnarled, the trees bending unnaturally toward the center of town like twisted antennae feeding off something ancient, and people began to dream again. It was always the same. A house with no walls. A staircase that descended forever, and the sound of wet breathing in the dark. Every morning, the townspeople awoke hollow-eyed, faces pale, clothes soaked in sweat. Some began muttering in languages they didn't know. Others screamed at shadows only they could see. One man clawed out his own eyes, claiming he had looked too far beneath. He died with a smile on his face, whispering to someone no one could see, "You're almost here, aren't you?" Sheriff Bennett called an emergency meeting. Only 12 people showed up. "We need to leave," someone said. "And go where?" Someone else replied. "This place owns us now." Robert didn't speak. He just stared at the floor, heart pounding as he thought of the journal, the old founder's journal, which now lived beneath his bed, wrapped in cloth and bound with twine. There was a final entry he hadn't dared read yet. Something about it felt sealed, like words that shouldn't be read, that only existed for when the end was truly close. That night, he unwrapped the journal, hands shaking, and read the final entry. "The house is not a place. It is the scar left behind when the earth remembers pain. We did not build it. We found it. And when it sleeps, we are safe. But when it wakes, it does not come to us as bricks or stone. It comes as memory that must be rebuilt. Each time it returns, it burrows deeper. Until one day it will be part of the earth. Until one day we will be the house. Robert dropped the journal. It hit the floor with a sound that was too loud, too heavy, as though the words inside had become real. And from the woods outside his window, a dim red light began to glow. Chapter 23. The beneath the light didn't flicker. It pulsed. Red. Dark. Red again. As though something was breathing beneath the trees. He stepped outside, barefoot, drawn forward like a sleepwalker toward the source. The entire town was quiet. Every window black. Every door locked. No dogs barking. No insects. Just the deep, wet sound of something growing underground. As he reached the edge of the forest, he saw it. Something massive had broken through the ground. It wasn't a building. It wasn't a tree. It was a rib. A massive stone rib, jutting up from the earth like the fossil of a god. And beneath it, stairs, descending endlessly, lit by dim red torches embedded in the walls, flickering though there was no fire. The stairs pulsed. The walls pulsed. And the further down he went, the more he felt his skin remembering something. A life that wasn't his. A place he'd never been. The whispers came back stronger now. Full voices. Chattering. Laughing. You're coming home now. You were the house. You were the house. As he descended, the stone began to breathe. Yes, breathe. The walls expanded and contracted, wet and pulsing. The staircase curved inward like the throat of something alive. And Robert knew then they had never stopped the curse. They had simply awakened it. He was walking into the mouth of something ancient, something that had waited, and worse still, it had chosen him. Chapter 24. The core of hollow pine. At the bottom, there was no floor, just a black pool of water, perfectly still, reflecting nothing. Robert stepped into it. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm. It simply was. He sank, but didn't drown. He floated, but didn't breathe. And in that silence, he saw it. A heart. A massive, rotted, stone heart, wrapped in veins made of roots and bones. It beat once every 10 seconds, and with each beat, the water around him changed. First blood, then ash, then memories. He saw faces. Hundreds of every person who had ever vanished in Hollow Pine. They weren't dead. They weren't alive. They were part of it. Their mouths open, screaming without sound. Reaching, trapped, and at the center, wrapped in the roots like a cocoon, was Lucas, not dead. Not even truly himself, just a vessel, bloated and hollow, with thousands of eyes where his skin should have been. His mouth moved in reverse, chewing words that hadn't yet been spoken. Robert screamed. But the water did not echo. Chapter 25. You were always. May a voice filled the air, not from the heart, not from Lucas, but from everywhere. There was no town. There was no curse. There was only you. You were the one who stayed. You were the one who heard the whispers. And now, you are the vessel. You are the memory. You are the house. The roots surged forward, wrapping around Robert, pulling him deeper, fusing to his bones. He could feel his identity unraveling, his childhood, his name, his memories, one by one, being absorbed into the beating heart. The heart that would live as long as the land did. He didn't scream. He didn't breathe. He became. Chapter 26. The memory house. The roots didn't strangle. They rewrote. Robert's skin split without pain, veins unraveling into thread, nerves twining like ivy as the entity reshaped him not into a corpse, but into an extension, a living organ of the house that had no walls, the house that was now buried under hollow pine, deeper than memory, older than God. And yet, he remembered faces, his mother's laugh, rain slanting on the kitchen window, the creak of the back stairs. Lucas's grin before it, turned to rot, the journal's cracked leather, the way the earth had first groaned when he stepped onto the ritual stones. These memories clung to him like thorns. But they weren't his anymore. They were being filed, stored, added to the archive beneath the town. The house wasn't just alive, it was an organ of recollection. A library made of flesh, preserving every death, every scream, every moment of terror it had consumed. And Robert was being added to the index. The pool beneath him darkened, the reflections turning from faces to windows, fragments of other lives. He saw people he'd never met, in towns he'd never been, each haunted by a version of this same house. A crumbling barn in Kansas, a ruined tenement in Warsaw, a wind-battered lighthouse on the edge of Newfoundland, all of them whispering, "The house travels beneath." It wasn't a place, it was a parasitic memory that latched onto land, fed on time, and built itself out of regret, trauma, and silence. And it had found a permanent host in Hollow Pine. Inside the house heart, voices circled Robert, not from mouths, but from remnants, souls like dust in the air. It began as hunger. Then came the naming, and now it remembers for us. Forever. He opened his eyes. Not human eyes anymore. Black glass, perfect and depthless, absorbing all light. And he saw it all. Chapter 27. Echoes in the bones beneath Hollow Pine. The caverns bloomed. Giant chambers opened like lungs, breathing sulfur and ancient breath. There were no walls here, only ribs of stone and gristle, pathways etched into the flesh of the world. The tunnels were not made. They had grown over centuries, winding like veins beneath the town. Robert, no longer Robert, but something that had remembered him, floated through these tunnels, untouched by gravity. Wherever his thoughts drifted, the walls changed. When he thought of pain, they wept blood. When he remembered Lucas's final scream, the walls pulsed with soundless vibration, and in the distance, others walked, the forgotten. Men and women, some centuries old, their bodies translucent, etched in light, their mouths sewn shut with whisper threads. These were the archivists of the house, the keepers of memory. Their role was endless, to carry the stories of the devoured, to repeat the screams of those consumed, until time itself forgot them. One of them turned to Robert and placed a single hand on his chest. The voice entered not through ears but bone. "You are the last true heir. You are the final archive. When the land is gone and the sky is ash, you will carry the house." Robert tried to speak, but his mouth no longer opened. That he didn't need to speak. He didn't have to. The house spoke through him now. It moved through thought, through memory. It whispered into sleeping children, made their teeth ache in the dark. It tugged the dreams of old men toward forgotten corridors and told widows the true reasons their husbands had vanished in the mines. And now, the house had its voice. Chapter 28. The awakening of Hollow Pine above. In the town, people began to see things, not shadows. Reflections. Every mirror in town began showing rooms that weren't there, hallways lined with stone teeth, doors opening onto staircases that spun like drills into the earth. Children refused to go near glass. Dogs barked at kitchen sinks. Old folks stared long into their bathroom mirrors and whispered, "You came back." Sheriff Bennett's wife went missing. The locks were untouched. Her clothes were in the dryer. Her wedding ring on the bedside table. But there were muddy footprints leading into the mirror. Then the sleeplessness began. The entire town stopped dreaming. At first, it was a relief. No more nightmares. But then came the fatigue. People started collapsing in public, falling asleep mid-sentence. And when they did sleep, they vanished. Their bodies simply melted into the sheets, leaving behind only the echo of their last breath. One by one, Hollow Pine emptied, and Robert watched from beneath the roots, the memory house expanding like a tumor. Chapter 29. The god sit at the center of it all, in the chamber where the ribs of the world met. Something stirred. The house had birthed a seed, a bulbous, luminous thing, part fungus, part fetus, all wrong. It pulsed with sound, bass tones so deep they rattled teeth above ground. And inside it a new form. Not Robert, not Lucas, something blended. Something made from centuries of fear, blood, and sorrow. It would rise, it would speak. And it would remember the world so thoroughly that the world would forget itself. Because memory wasn't just a record, it was a weapon. When the seed hatched, the house would not be bound to the earth. It would crawl into time, unraveling the present by reshaping the past. Town by town, city by city. First, it would remember your name. Then, your dreams. Then, your mother's face. And finally, it would remember you better than you remembered yourself. And in that moment, you would become part of it. A memory carved into its infinite walls. Chapter 30. The final room somewhere deep inside the house. Robert still existed, that a room had been built for him. A replica of his childhood bedroom. The same creaky bed, the cracked window, the glow-in-the-dark stars still clinging to the ceiling. Except the stars moved when he wasn't looking. And the window never showed the same scene twice. He sat in the bed now, no longer bound, no longer changed. Just Robert, or the memory of him, or the idea of him. He couldn't be sure. The door creaked open. Lucas stood there, still warped, still wrong. His head was too long, eyes too deep, his limbs gently bending in directions they shouldn't. But he smiled. "We finally did it," he said. "Did what?" "Became the house." And Robert wept. Not for himself, not even for the town, but for the world, because he understood now. This wasn't an isolated haunting. This wasn't a cursed town or a bad piece of land. This was a new beginning. And in the dark beneath Hollow Pine, the seed cracked open, and the house began to remember the rest of the earth. Chapter 31. The house that ate the world. The seed split not with sound, but with silence so profound it unstitched the air. It bloomed inward first, collapsing space into thought, folding memory into sinew, warping every molecule of presence until what emerged from the core of Hollow Pine was not a creature, not a god, but a recollection so powerful it had mass, limbs, voice, and intent. Its form was not meant for human eyes. It was stitched from the voids between seconds, its body a mural of screaming faces, endless and overlapping, thousands of eyes blinking across its skin, all watching at once but none seeing the same moment. It had no mouth, but it spoke in frequencies that echoed backward through time, whispering its existence into the dreams of the past, feeding itself by being remembered before it existed. The house had evolved. It was no longer content to exist as a place. It had grown beyond walls, beyond timber, beyond ritual and land and summoning. It had transcended all architecture and groundedness. Now, it had become an event, a timeline, a memory virus that burrowed into the concept of place itself, warping reality by merely being thought of. The house, now called only it, didn't travel from one town to another. It awakened inside the gaps where cities forgot their histories, bloomed in suburbs where trauma was painted over with cheerful paint and picket fences, seeped into the bones of industrial husks and post-war ruins, rising from the mulch of generational sorrow like fungus with eyes. And all of it began at hollowpine.no. News reached the outer world. There was no footage of the town's death, no satellite ping, No Amber Alert for the dozens that vanished. The town simply stopped being discussed. It slipped out of GPS systems. Roads rerouted without planning. Maps updated themselves. Tourists, when asked, blinked in confusion. Hollow what? They'd ask. Is that upstate? Never heard of it. But some still dreamed. Some remembered pieces. A red glow through trees. The sound of stairs turning in the dark. The whisper of which stretching above them as they slept. The house was spreading through the subconscious now, wearing old nightmares like coats, hiding in the closets of the tired and the grieving, and in the ruins beneath the world. Where Robert had once floated in silent witness, something else awoke. Chapter 32. Robert of the Rift. The bedroom was still there. Robert sat in it for what may have been centuries or seconds. Time no longer applied here. He watched the ceiling stars move, saw his breath form frost in the shape of symbols he couldn't read, felt the roots of the house pulsing through the bedposts. But something in him refused to dissolve. Some stubborn thread of self pulled tight at the edges, vibrating with a kind of low, human resistance. He remembered his name. He remembered why he had come. He remembered Lucas's scream when they were children, not the infected one, not the distorted one, but the first, real one, when he'd fallen into the river and thought he was going to drown. And that scream grounded him. That scream was his. And from within the twisted flesh of the house, Robert stood. The walls rippled in protest, mirrors warping, the ceiling above him unfolding into a sky that had no stars, only spinning eyes. The house didn't like this. It hadn't planned for Will. It hadn't expected its chosen archivist to reject absorption. And yet, Robert felt himself reforming, his body knitting from memory, yes, but from his own, not the house's. He was not their puppet, not their library, not their seed. He was a man, and he wanted out. Chapter 33. The vein path. He began to walk. Out of the bedroom, down the hallway that spiraled in 4 dimensions, past portraits of people he never met, each one screaming when he looked too long. The walls bled memories, leaking images into the air. Children in basements, creatures with missing tongues, soldiers walking backward into shallow graves. The air buzzed with voices arguing over whose trauma was loudest. But Robert moved forward. He reached the vein path, the arterial tunnel that pulsed with the thoughts of every town the house had consumed. Here, the walls flickered like film strips. He saw the fall of Beacon's Hill, the drowning of Shelter's Hollow, the collapse of the Penumbra Asylum, all erased from official record, all replaced by vague euphemisms like environmental disaster or infrastructure failure. These weren't accidents. These were meals. The house had been feeding for centuries, and now Robert could feel it in his chest, a tiny splinter of reality still untainted. A signal, a frequency, a way out. He followed the rhythm. 123. Beat. 123. A heartbeat. His heartbeat. Chapter 34. The Tower of Teeth. The path led upward, spiraling toward the Tower of Teeth. A central structure inside the house's subconscious where all consumed identities were digested and rewritten. It was a cathedral of bone, ceiling lost in darkness, floor a mosaic of shattered reflections. Here, the house processed people, not their bodies, but their concepts. It stripped meaning from mothers, burned hope out of lovers, broke the identity of children into syllables and reassigned them to newer victims. It was here that Lucas had been rewritten. It was here that Robert would either lose himself or reclaim what was left. As he entered, the air solidified. He moved like he was walking through coagulated memory, each step pulling at his flesh, trying to unwrite his intentions. "You don't belong here," the house whispered. "I was made here," Robert replied. The chamber groaned. Teeth clicked in patterns of doubt. The floor opened beneath him, showing infinite versions of himself, drowned, burned, torn apart, forgotten. All possible deaths, all potential failures. but Robert moved through them like fire through paper. He was not afraid anymore. The house could show him every failure, but it could not break the one thing it needed from him. As Wildati reached the core of the tower, a massive stone mirror with no reflection, the mirror of origin.it showed only who you were before the house found you. Robert stepped forward and placed his hand against the stone. Chapter 35. The becoming the moment his skin touched the mirror, light poured through him, not white, but memory light, the hue of childhood laughter and first guilt, and the silence of rooms where no one ever apologized. He felt everything at once, every moment he had ever feared, every time he had doubted his sanity, every dream warped by the house. And he held on. The mirror cracked, and behind it, a door. Not physical. A mental breach. A tunnel out through forgotten thought, an exit encoded into memory, meant only for those who remembered who they were despite everything. The house screamed then, not from a throat, but from the entire world. Storms erupted, churches bled, birds fell from skies in spirals. All across the globe, people had one identical nightmare, a man walking through fire, holding a mirror with no reflection, and something behind him crying in the voice of the earth itself. Robert stepped through the door, and for the first time in decades, the house lost something. A memory it could not keep. Chapter 36. The shattered veil. When Robert stepped through the breach, reality trembled, not in a localized, geographic way, but in a universal memory shift, like a thread tugged loose in a woven tapestry of existence. Somewhere, an old man in Romania forgot how to die. A lighthouse keeper on the edge of Scotland screamed into the sea and collapsed into ash. A newborn in Caracas opened its eyes and wept the name of Hollow Pine, even though the town no longer existed. Every breach in the house's dominion left behind psychic shrapnel, splinters of unexplainable awareness lodged in random minds across the planet. Robert wasn't walking through space. He was moving through unremembered time. The world had been rewritten by the house's influence for too long, events molded and twisted, certain tragedies manufactured only to feed the archive below. But now Robert strode barefoot across this unseen world, a realm between the cracks of official history. He stood on forgotten roads, where the pavement was etched with the names of the missing roads that blinked in and out of visibility as if ashamed of their own paths. The air was thick with static thoughts, echoing the regrets of people long erased. Each step he took redefined cause and effect in microscopic ways. He was becoming more than man. He was becoming a counterforce. The house had thought it was alone, that no one escaped, that no memory ever returned with shape or name. But Robert remembered himself. And worse, for the house, he remembered what it did. That made him dangerous. That made him true. Chapter 37. Reverberations all over the world. Something began to break. Mirrors began cracking without impact, not shattering. Just hairline fractures, subtle, almost imperceptible veins of defiance. Every bathroom, every subway station, every elevator, every fitting room. As though something behind the glass was pulling away, resisting the view. The surface tension between observer and reflection had thinned, and people felt it. They paused. They stared. And then they heard it, a whisper, barely audible, right before waking. He's remembering. The house knew it couldn't reach Robert now, not through traditional means. His breach had granted him a temporal immunity. It couldn't rewrite him again unless he stepped willingly into a memory it owned. So, it changed strategies. It spoke to the world. And the first voice it used was Lucas's. Chapter 38. The voice returned across the news. Static rippled during live broadcasts. Anchors froze mid-sentence, pupils dilating, lips moving not with their own breath, but with someone else's voice, someone that should have been dead. Their mouths formed the words. He lied. He carries infection. He is the breach. He will bring it all back. Then they collapsed. Every single one. The feed cut. Cameras fried. And in the silence that followed, those who had seen the message began to dream of a boy named Lucas, a town they couldn't find on any map, and a long hallway lit by impossible lights. Each dream carried the same warning. Robert is memory's undoing. The house wasn't trying to erase him now. It was trying to convince the world he was the disease. Chapter 39. The Archive Hunters. That's when they came. The Archive Hunters, born not of flesh, but of forged memories. They weren't real people, at least. Not anymore. They had been written into being by the house itself. Patchwork constructs of real lives folded over fiction. Each one carried a name taken from someone long forgotten, a voice borrowed from a priest, a soldier, a teacher, or a sibling who had vanished. And they believed they were real. They believed Robert had killed their world. They believed they were saving memory by finding him. The house gave them tools, glass daggers, mirrors on chains, skin-bound grimoires that smelled of salt and infant teeth. They could appear anywhere someone remembered a nightmare. They would knock on your mind, peel back the paper-thin barrier between memory and dream, and step in wearing your face. They hunted Robert across the unremembered terrain. But Robert, he was changing. He no longer bled. He no longer slept. He no longer aged in measurable ways. He had become anomaly incarnate, and he began to leave messages. Chapter 40. Robert's words. He carved them on subway tunnels that no longer existed, wrote them into the frost of abandoned cabins, etched them into the glass eyes of mannequins discarded behind burned-down malls. Wherever forgotten spaces lingered, his words appeared like fungus. The house is not history. It is hunger. And with every message, more people began to wake up gasping, not because of terror, but because of clarity. They would remember things they had not lived, towns they had never visited, names of people they had never met, who felt more real than their own families. One woman awoke in Tokyo and wept for her son Daniel. Though she had no children. A man in Cape Town remembered burying his wife under the stairs of a farmhouse he'd never owned. A boy in Helsinki began drawing floor plans to a school that had been demolished before he was born. The house was leaking, and Robert was the puncture. Chapter 41. The dreamless rebellion. As the archive hunters closed in, Robert began collecting them, not to kill, not to destroy, but to awaken. When he caught one, he didn't run. He spoke. He told them their real names, names the house had buried deep. He told them who they had been before they were made, before their lives were stripped and rewritten into tools of memory. And when he did, they broke, not into madness, but into clarity. They dropped their knives. They wept, and they turned against their creator. Some disintegrated on the spot, unable to exist without the house's anchor. But a few, just a few, remained, and they followed him. Now Robert was no longer walking alone. He had others behind him, each one a soul once stolen, each one remembering. They called themselves the Dreamless, because the house could no longer infect their sleep, and they had one mission: to erase the house from time itself. Chapter 42. The conflagration. Memory. It began with a thought. Robert stood on a mountaintop of forgotten bones in an unnamed realm of memory, and he remembered fire. Not just the image of it, the meaning of it. He remembered what it meant to burn a thing so completely that no shadow of it remained. He didn't want to just destroy the house. He wanted to unremember it, to strip it from every echo, every photograph, every myth. And he found the answer. There was one place even the house could not fully control, the first spark, the origin of memory itself. If he could reach that place, if he could take the house's own birth and cast it into the furnace of forgetting, then it would unravel. All of it. Every haunted town, every twisted life, every cursed mirror. Gone, not by death, but by oblivion. Not erased, never written at all. And the house felt it howled in every graveyard, screamed from cracks in the earth, bled from the moon, and whispered into the minds of every man, woman, and child who had ever felt alone in a quiet room. But it was too late. Robert was already walking toward the core, and behind him marched the dreamless. Chapter 43. The descent into the first memory the world had thinned. Where once Robert walked through places made of stone and silence, now he stepped into layers of thoughts so old, so primal, that light bent to them. The landscape before him was not a landscape at all, but an ever-shifting bloom of neural pulses, a wilderness of half-formed memories shaped like roots, like language, like the bones of gods no one dared remember. The air buzzed with first fears. Not fears of monsters, not of death, but the original fear. The fear of being known. This was the origin of memory. It had no gate, only awareness. It recognized him as he stepped closer. It whispered, "You do not belong here, anomaly." But Robert didn't pause. He had ceased to be anomaly long ago. Now he was the correction, a scar forming over a cosmic wound. Behind him, the dreamless moved with reverence. Each step they took into this realm peeled away more of what the house had turned them into. Their masks fell. Their false histories unspooled and burned behind their eyes. Names returned to them like old songs, names stolen, buried, rewritten. And as they remembered, the house weakened. In the skies above the real world, clouds began forming in impossible shapes. Names, rooms, screams. Cities' long-thought myths were whispered again. Some people woke with dirt beneath their nails and didn't know why. Others opened closets to find stairs that hadn't been there the day before. The barriers were rupturing. Reality was beginning to remember everything. Chapter 44. The house at the core, and then they saw the center of the origin, nestled in the spine of the very first memory ever thought by a sentient being. Was the true form of the house, not as wood or stone or structure, but as a monument of endless recollection, writhing with a million arms made of orphaned dreams, screaming faces cast in amber, stairways leading into mouths, and windows that looked back at you before you looked into them. It was a library of pain written by every living thing that had ever felt forgotten. The house was not evil. It was hungry, born the moment the first creature realized it would die. And that memory was the only way to survive that death. It whispered, "Without me, you are nothing. Without me, you are forgotten. Without me, your pain was for nothing." Robert stepped forward. "No," he said. "You don't preserve pain. You trap it. You feed on it." The house bled light. It pulsed, casting illusions of every person Robert had ever failed. Lucas screaming, his parents drowning in rooms of memory, lovers he could not save, strangers consumed by the infection. It begged. It accused. "I am you," it hissed. "I was born when you looked away." Chapter 45. The mirror unwritten. Robert raised the final relic he had carried since his emergence, the mirror with no reflection, forged in the rift, unburned by fire, untouched by time. A mirror that showed only what should never have been. He held it toward the house. The effect was immediate. The house recoiled, shrieking in voices it had stolen. Its walls folded inward. Its limbs began to unthread. And the dreamless began to chant, not words, but memories, spoken as if declaring facts to the fabric of reality. "I was born in October. My mother died in winter, not fire. My brother's name was Elijah, not 88B. I remember the truth. I remember before the house." Every declaration tore a hole through the monument. Every assertion of true memory stripped it of its stolen mass. The house trembled. Robert pressed the mirror to its core, and for the first time in eternity, the house saw itself. It saw what it was. A parasite. A thief of pain. A plagiarist of sorrow. And it began to collapse inward, not with violence, but with unbeing. Chapter 46. The unwriting from across the world. The changes began. Police files vanished from existence. Urban legends turned to static. Haunted houses crumbled into dust as if they had stood for 10,000 years. Families forgot the emptiness. They had felt every night at 3 a.m. the house was not dying. It was never born. Every memory it had taken was returned to the people it had stolen from, not as horror, but as silence. Not a void, just a quiet where something ugly once lurked. And Robert, he began to fade. The price of rewriting the house was the unwriting of himself, too. He had been forged by its existence, birthed by its hunger. And so, as it was erased, so was he, but not before one final word. Remember yourself. That's all it takes. Chapter 47. The last dream the dreamless scattered. Now just people, freed of the echo. They woke in places they'd never been, alive again for the first time, clutching faint remnants of someone they couldn't name, but whom they loved. Some became authors, others archivists. Some just lived, quietly, without fear of being rewritten, and deep in a forest that no longer had a name, on a plot of land that had no house or flower bloomed. Red, bright, warm, and beneath it, a mirror with no reflection cracked, still humming with what could have been. The hollow that hungers. There was once a town carved into the flesh of a forest, Merriwick, a place built around old stone and older secrets, where the trees leaned in like eavesdropping giants and the wind whispered in a dialect of decay. A forgotten town that rarely appeared on maps but was always listed in the ledgers of those who hunted silence for profit, corporations that saw the ancient woods not as a sacred biome but a buffet of pulp and profit, sending their teeth into its roots to chew. Through centuries of soil-soaked memory, the town held 83 people when the sun rose on the last normal day. By dusk, 41 were gone, and the rest had begun to hear the singing. It began with Clara Weems, a cartographer with hands perpetually stained in graphite, who had come to Merriwick to chart the last stretch of unlogged wilderness for the Orion Timber Survey. She was methodical, skeptical, and dryly funny in a way that made others trust her with things they shouldn't. When she found the first hollow, it looked like a natural sinkhole at the edge of Sector 12, a black wound in the earth, maybe 30 feet wide, perfectly round and humming like an electrical fence on a cold night. It didn't show on satellite. It didn't show on old maps. It didn't show on anything. And when she peered down with her scope, she saw eyes, not reflections. Eyes. Massive, open, and slow blinking, rimmed in red, wider than graves. She told Dr. Lionel Griggs, the geologist stationed with her team, but he didn't laugh. He didn't joke. He looked at her like he already knew. And later that night, he took her journal, scrawled with the exact coordinates and diagrams of the hollow, and burned it in the oil drum behind their cabin. She found him an hour later, weeping under the porch, whispering, "They don't forget the ones who look back." 2 days later, Dr. Griggs was found fused to the side of an old pine, his flesh embedded in bark like veins through soft clay, his jaw unhinged and his mouth packed with moss. The forest had started to eat. That was when the town began to fold inward. Sheriff Hal Conway, broad-shouldered, small-hearted, and crooked in quiet ways, tried to maintain order. He'd once shot a boy in the woods for stealing traps and buried the body without a report. He believed in chain of command and backdoor deals. But when his daughter Eloise came back from her walk with a black-veined tongue and no memory of where she'd gone, he started to crack. He locked her in the attic and fed her through the vent. The next morning, all the birds in Merriwick had vanished, and the air stank of iron. The town council tried to evacuate. Cell service was dead. Roads cracked. The bridge out of town dissolved overnight, the wood now soft as bread soaked in blood. Something was pushing against reality itself, wrinkling time like wet paper. Meanwhile, Daphne and Calderon, aging siblings who'd run the antique shop for decades, were building a shrine in the basement, not to God, but to the mouth. They'd spoken of the mouth before, back when they were younger and drunker and no one took them seriously. A thing older than the forest. A sleeping cavity of bone and teeth beneath Merriwick, a living abscess of the world, where the skin of the earth had grown thin. They said it fed on stories, on history, on memory. It woke because we remembered it. Calder told the mayor in a letter. And now it remembers us. That's when the second hollow opened, this one beneath the community center during a town meeting, swallowing 15 people in under 3 seconds, the floor crumbling like a pie crust and revealing a pit of writhing tendrils, whispering names in backward voices. From there, it unraveled. Father Mallory, who once baptized an entire summer camp of orphans in river water tainted with mercury, started having visions. He climbed the bell tower naked, proclaiming the town had been built on the molar of a god, and plucked out his own teeth, one by one, before diving headfirst into the steeple and cracking open like a dropped egg. Children began drawing spirals, over and over, their hands moving even while asleep. One boy, Sammy Nels, dug into his own stomach with a spoon and said he was making a map for the feeders. Mrs. Eleonora Bray, a reclusive historian who had filled her attic with banned books and skeleton keys, went blind overnight. But then she saw better, said her new sight was given by those who crawl beneath. She began to speak in a language that made dogs cry and clocks run backward. She said the mouth wanted an offering, or it would swallow the sky. By this point, only 20 people remained, and the trees were moving now, slowly but undeniably pulling their roots from the soil like fingers cracking joints, stepping forward when no one was watching. Sometimes they'd rearrange themselves overnight. A grove of birch where no birch had ever grown. Trees with faces pressed in bark, mouths gaping in midscreen. Something below was rising, and the woods were making way. Clara, Sheriff Conway, Eloise, now barely human, and 6 others barricaded themselves inside the library, the one place the whispers hadn't reached yet. Maybe it was the lead-lined archives, maybe the building's age, maybe it was luck. But inside, they planned. They found a book, bound in human leather, locked in a jawbone clasp. It spoke of the mouth, of what it had once been, an old god, maybe, or a parasite left from a previous world, a thing that burrowed into realities and chewed its way through timelines. It fed on stories, on memory, on legacy, and Merriwick had become its feast. Clara devised a plan. Descend into the hollows, find the source. Use the book to seal it, or join it and become its voice if sealing failed. It was suicide. But the alternative was worse. The survivors strapped lanterns to their chests and ropes to their waists. They descended into the largest hollow, the one that hummed a lullaby in the voice of lost mothers. The descent took hours. The tunnels twisted like intestines. The walls breathed. They found the mouth at the end, miles beneath the surface, a cavern the size of a cathedral, filled with teeth as long as trees and a tongue slick with names, pulsing with thought. It opened, not to speak, but to listen. One by one, the survivors began to forget who they were. One by one, their bodies changed. Clara held onto herself the longest. She recited her birth date, her address, the names of the dogs she had owned. But when she saw the face of her dead sister blink from the mouth's folds, she stumbled forward, arms wide, whispering, "I remember you." The mouth smiled. Merriwick was never found again. No satellite picks it up. No road leads there. But sometimes, if you dream deep enough, you hear the singing, and your mouth starts to water. The hollow that hungers. Part 2. There are places where the ground remembers the weight of footsteps, and even after the feet are gone, the echoes remain. Merriwick was swallowed. Yes, But its scream lingered, an invisible fissure in the world's fabric, vibrating with trauma. You can't see it on a map, but you can feel it if you walk long enough through the fog-drenched pines just west of the Harkley River. The air feels warmer there, wetter, and if you close your eyes, you might hear the breath of something enormous exhaling beneath your feet. 6 months after the last known contact with the Orion Timber Survey team, a secondary search party was dispatched, not out of compassion, but out of corporate liability. 4 agents in total: Derek Ewell, former Army recon turned field tracker; Lizette Verne, a cultural anthropologist with a soft voice and sharp eyes; Dr. Howard Klein, a linguist obsessed with pre-literate civilizations; and Sierra Lau, a freelance documentarian with a personal interest. Her sister had vanished on a survey crew 4 years ago in almost the same region. They weren't told about Merriwick, only that there had been an incident. When they reached the town's last known GPS ping, all they found were trees, wrong trees, as Sierra put it. Trees that bled sap the color of old wine. Trees with carved initials that blinked when the wind blew. Trees that leaned toward them when no one was looking. They set up camp at what should have been Merriwick's town center. The readings were off. Compass needles spun. Radios hummed static shaped like laughter. On the second night, Derek found a tooth the size of a dinner plate, buried just beneath the moss. He said nothing to the others, just stared at it, rubbed it clean, slipped it into his pack like a relic. But the others noticed his behavior shift. He stopped speaking, would stand for hours facing the trees, lips moving without sound. And at night, he'd chew in his sleep. Loud, cracking sounds. Like bone. By the 4th night, Lizette vanished. No tracks, no struggle, just her field recorder, still running, left beside the fire. On playback, it revealed nothing but soft, guttural chanting in a language no one recognized. Klein analyzed it obsessively, scribbling notes with a fury that bordered on madness. She was taken into the mouth, he muttered, eyes red. But not all of her. It tastes first, then decides. Sierra refused to sleep. She filmed everything. Trees twitching, shadows slithering, her own reflection blinking out of sync in the lens. Then the dream started. The same for all of them, a cavernous cathedral of teeth, walls of writhing muscle and root, a sky made of flesh. And in the center, a figure, Clara Weems, but she was no longer human. Not entirely. She stood tall, taller than any natural thing. Her limbs warped into elegant, thorny lengths, her eyes black pits leaking ink. Her voice came from everywhere, layered with hundreds of others, men, women, children, all speaking in perfect unison. You looked into the mouth. Now it looks through you. Each night, she appeared closer in the dream, reaching, smiling. Dr. Klein disappeared next, his tint shredded from the inside out, his skin left behind like an empty coat. What remained of his brain was found smeared in spirals across the bark of a nearby cedar, still pulsing faintly like it was dreaming alone. Sierra and Derek tried to flee. The GPS refused to stabilize. The forest shifted, rearranged. Paths that should have led north led nowhere, or worse, back to the same patch of ground with deeper footprints each time. Derek finally spoke again, but only one sentence. It's birthing itself through us. That night, he cut his own tongue out and fed it to the fire, and the fire screamed. Meanwhile, far from the woods, the mouth began to seed itself in other places. Urban mouths. Digital mouths. Memory mouths. A woman in Los Angeles dreamed of her childhood home sinking into a black sea. When she woke up, she was buried in dirt up to her chest in her apartment, and her mother was there, dead 20 years, brushing her hair and humming the Ash lullaby. A podcaster in London uploaded an episode about obscure towns that had vanished mysteriously when he played back the file. His voice had been replaced with a chorus of people crying his name. A little girl in a New York hospital drew a picture of her family, smiling, except each face had a second mouth, blooming from the forehead like a rose made of enamel. The mouth was memory. The mouth was media. It didn't need trees anymore. Sierra eventually made it out. At least, part of her did. She was found on the shoulder of Route 11, muttering coordinates that didn't exist. She wouldn't sleep, wouldn't eat, but her camera was intact. They reviewed the footage. The last recording shows Clara again, closer, smiling wider. Behind her, the rest of the Marowak survivors stood, not as humans, but mouth bearers, their bodies hollowed and regrown around tooth and echo, eyes like glistening marrow, hands folded over bellies that twitched with unborn things. Clara spoke once more, directly into the camera. We chewed our way through. Now it's your turn to swallow. The tape ends with static that never stops, even when the player is turned off. It's been a year now. The hollows are still opening, not just in forests, in subway tunnels, in desert sinkholes, in abandoned amusement parks, and the thoughts of dying men. The mouth has no single shape anymore. It appears as a child in a field, a hole in the wall, a story you hear and can't forget. It appears when you're alone, when you remember. You may not believe in it, but it believes in you, and it's hungry. The hollow that hungers, Part 3, expanded. It began appearing in cities next, no longer in deep woods or crumbling border towns, but in places packed with people who couldn't afford to remember, or worse, remembered too much. There was Lucien Wallet, a subway conductor in Chicago who stopped his train in the middle of a tunnel one night when he saw a mirror standing upright on the tracks, unsupported and flawless. When he stepped off to investigate, he saw himself in the reflection, but older, with hollow eyes and teeth growing from the corners of his cheeks like barnacles. The train camera captured him walking into the glass and disappearing completely, leaving behind only his conductor's hat. Soaked in saliva. In Montreal, Joanna Rivas, a sleep therapist, began losing patience, first to insomnia, then to something she called dream bleed. Her clients claimed they were being stalked by a woman with no face and a stomach that grinned. After 3 of them tore their own eyes out while smiling, Joanna set up cameras in her sleep lab and wired herself in. The footage showed her waking up halfway through the night, staring directly into the lens with a grin not hers, and saying in Clara Weems' voice, "Sleep is where the mouth learns your name." No one's sure what happened to her after that, but her clinic burned down and her voice is still heard in white noise samples across audio editing software, whispering phrases no linguist has been able to translate. Dr. Miles Penbrook, a folklorist in Wales, published a digital archive of oral traditions about earth bellies and stone gnawers, but redacted the final entry, one which described a dream where the forest stood upside down, with its roots above and sky below, and a pit in the center of the world where a tongue spoke backward truths. He never made it to his final lecture. His last email, time-stamped at 3:33 a.m., contained only a subject line: "The mouth has always been here." The body of the email was just a spiral made of teeth, meticulously arranged in ASCII characters. In Tokyo, Yuna Morizawa, a digital artist with a growing online presence, created a 3D rendering of what she called the God Eater, a living void shaped like a cathedral made of molars, with a pulsing red halo. Her render went viral, especially after viewers claimed the video caused seizures, nightmares, and in rare cases, hallucinations of a voice asking for stories. She vanished from the internet 2 days later. Her apartment was found sealed shut from the inside with a wet substance that resembled human tongue tissue, and on the walls, her own name written backwards thousands of times. Back in the States, Walter Finch, an aging preacher in Nebraska, gave his final sermon from a pulpit carved from a hollow oak he claimed had whispered the gospel of the forgotten root. He spoke in a language no one had heard, yet all understood, every word bleeding into the bones of the listeners. Several congregants dropped dead from heart attacks, their mouths stretched in ecstasy. Finch levitated 3 feet into the air and exploded into a flock of eyeless birds that screamed in his voice. The rest of the church burned with no source of ignition ever found. And then came the echo-born. They didn't arrive by air or land or birth. They were not summoned, not conjured. They remembered themselves into being, reassembled from shreds of stories people told to survive trauma. Tall, thin, wrapped in human skin stretched over bone like plastic wrap over splinters. Their heads turned fully backward, and their mouths were not on their faces, but on their chests, pulsing like second hearts. They came in threes, always in threes. They would appear near sites where the mouth had fed, like in a Brooklyn apartment complex, where a child named Alma Reeve drew her dreams in chalk on the hallway floor. One drawing showed a woman with hundreds of hands feeding a city to a giant mouth in the ground. Another showed her own mother melting in a soup while whispering. The teeth are in the walls. When the echo-born came, they stood silently outside her apartment door for hours. The door dissolved. The girl was never seen again, but a new door was drawn in chalk in her place. No one who opens it comes back. Marcus Delaney, a data analyst in Portland, noticed a pattern in consumer metadata. Phrases like hungry for truth, swallowed whole, and voice in the pit were trending across thousands of unrelated documents, blogs, and voice-to-text transcripts. His employer fired him for data obsession, but Marcus continued analyzing the patterns until he uncovered an audio clip embedded in the binary code of several corrupted Excel files. The clip was just 6 seconds long. It sounded like breathing, then a word, we. He's now institutionalized, mute, but occasionally carves spirals into his food tray with his teeth. The mouth changes people slowly, like rot beneath paint. Some don't even know they've been touched by it. Like Rena Holtz, a 12th grade teacher in Cleveland, who's been writing student names on the chalkboard that don't belong to any roster. Names like Eloise Conway, Dr. Lionel Griggs, and Daphne Roan. One day she wrote the word mouth 500 times before collapsing. Her students say her eyes were completely black before she hit the ground. Timothy Bragg, a podcaster known for investigating urban legends, created a 3-part series on Merriwick after hearing whispers about a town that had been chewed out of the map. His 3rd episode ended mid-sentence when he began screaming and didn't stop. The raw audio file is 17 hours long. Listeners claim that if you speed it up, you can hear a second voice beneath his own. Clara Weems, reciting names and locations from memory like a roll call for the devoured. The mouth never repeats. It only accumulates. It doesn't infect. It remembers you into itself, spreads your imprint like roots under skin. The people it touches don't vanish. They continue, half-remembered echoes stitched into dreams, shadows, or forgotten places that feel just a little too quiet. And some people return, like Sheriff Hal Conway, who was seen in a gas station security cam 2 states over. He looked older, twisted, his mouth split wider than natural, lined with black gums. He placed a VHS tape on the counter labeled, "Watch this TO forget," paid in teeth, and vanished without a trace. The footage was erased minutes later by a spontaneous EMP. Eloise, once his daughter, now a prophet of the hollow, appears in scattered dreams across the country. Survivors of traumatic events claim she walks through their memories barefoot, trailing vines made of jawbone, speaking in riddles like, "The mouth does not choose the hungry. It chooses those who fed too long on lies." And what of Clara? She's no longer just the voice. She's the form the mouth favors. A template, a vessel, an avatar of ancient hunger wrapped in the memory of a woman who simply looked too long into the hole. She is appearing now in paintings, mirror flashes, glitched surveillance loops, sand dunes, old nursery rhymes, and those moments where you forget why you entered a room. Sometimes, you swear you see her across the street, looking at you like she knows what you forgot, and the hollows keep appearing, not just in Earth, but in conversation gaps, in missing years, in the pause between inhale and scream, in the silence that comes when you remember something you were never supposed to know. N01 escapes the mouth. Because the mouth is you, once you recall it. Every time you speak its name, or fear its shape, you help carve it deeper into the world that's not coming, that it's already here. You let it in the moment you asked, "What's at the bottom of the hole?" And the answer is, you. The hollow that hungers. Part 4, expanded. The mouth did not just consume people. It consumed places, memories, and concepts, as though it had learned how to unmake the world itself. To understand it, you had to let go of the notion of time as something linear. There were no beginnings, no endings, just an eternal, relentless chewing, grinding, devouring. But it wasn't just a monstrous force of nature. No, the mouth was becoming an idea, a slow infection of the mind, spreading like ink in water, blotting out any resistance with its sheer, incomprehensible hunger. The mouth didn't want to feed, it wanted to transform. The beginning of the end in the distant city of Omaha, where life continued in its dull, repetitive grind, a small group of students began to notice an alarming trend. They weren't close friends, just individuals from disparate cliques who happened to find each other through strange coincidence. What brought them together was an unease, a creeping sensation of familiarity in the most bizarre places. Nina Davrin, a 22-year-old philosophy major, was the first to notice. It started with the photographs. She had a habit of collecting discarded snapshots from dumpsters, outside yard sales, old estate sales, anything that caught her eye. One afternoon, she found an image in a stack, a street corner in Omaha, dated 1968. The buildings were different, the cars old-fashioned, but something about the image felt wrong. A small figure in the distance seemed almost out of place, standing on the sidewalk where none should have been. At first, it was just a curiosity. Then, she found a similar photograph, this one from 2005, but showing the same corner, and that same figure, but older, with a tattered coat that seemed to eat into the very air around it. The figure had no face. Nina was shaken, but she shrugged it off. That is, until she discovered the third photograph. This time, it was the same corner, the same figure, but this time it was smiling, not just any smile. A smile with too many teeth. Joshua Carr, a history student and Nina's reluctant friend, didn't believe her at first. He thought it was some weird coincidence, maybe some photoshopping prank. But the deeper they dug into the photographs, the more the figure, the one without a face, seemed to be following them. Joshua started hearing whispers when he walked down familiar streets, whispers that called his name. At first, he thought he was losing his mind, but after his 5th time walking past a certain street corner and hearing the same whispers, he couldn't ignore it anymore. One evening, he found himself outside his apartment complex, staring at an old poster taped to the wall. The edges were ragged, but the image was clear. It was an old tourism ad for Omaha from the 1970s. His eyes scanned the photo, and his breath caught. The figure was there. Again, .by now. Nina and Joshua were no longer alone. Maria Jensen, a student studying linguistics and semiotics, had begun to connect the dots. She had been researching the way language broke down in traumatic environments, how certain words, sounds, or phrases could trigger disassociation. When she heard Nina's story, she immediately recognized the phenomena. The mouth. This was exactly what the mouth did. It infiltrated reality, weaving itself into the fabric of things that should have been forgotten. Maria's theory was simple. The mouth was a fracture, not just of memory, but of time itself. It had started in places like Merriwick, where history itself began to unravel. Every time someone looked at a moment too long, that moment became part of the mouth's hunger. The more you remembered, the deeper it sank. Maria was right, of course, but then the others began to notice something even stranger. They weren't just seeing the figure in the photographs anymore. It was in their dreams, in the reflection of the water on the streets after it rained. The figure would appear, its smile widening, its body distorted, its eyes missing, replaced with something wet and slithering. And it was always the same, no matter where they went, no matter what city, what street. The figure was everywhere. One night, Nina found herself standing in front of the mirror in her apartment, the reflection just off. Her body looked like it was made of shifting shadows, and in the corner of her vision, something seemed to be growing from the back of her head, a mouth, black and gaping, too large to fit within the confines of her skull. But when she turned, the mouth vanished. That was the first night the mouth reached through Nina. In another corner of the world, Alastair Moore, a young documentary filmmaker in Prague, was experiencing something similar. He had been filming the renovations of an old Gothic cathedral, one that had stood vacant for decades. But after the third day of shooting, Alastair started noticing something strange. The chapel's architecture seemed wrong. The angles weren't quite right. The stone walls, though centuries old, didn't feel weathered enough. The edges of the arches seemed to blur when he looked too long. When he played back his footage, Alastair discovered the blurred shapes in the stone. It was subtle at first, a movement in the corner of the frame, then a shape growing out of the stone, forming into something human, a face, but not one he recognized. It was too old, too familiar. The figure in the footage looked like someone he'd met briefly, the same figure he had seen in his dreams, standing on the cathedral steps, smiling with too many teeth. Meanwhile, Chester Allen, a cryptographer in Prague, found a cipher buried in an old text at a library. The text was written in an unrecognizable language, symbols that appeared to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. He worked tirelessly to decode it, using every trick he knew. After months of research, he managed to piece together the meaning behind the symbols. The words he uncovered were not just a phrase, they were a command. The hollow will feast, and you will feed it. Chester, now desperate, traced the cipher's origins to Merriwick, a town long abandoned. His research led him to the last known survivors of the town, but when he tried to reach them, they were gone. Only a single message remained, carved into the walls of an old, rotting shack. I am not a man anymore. I am the mouth. The mouth was everywhere now. Not just in the corners of cities, not just in old photos or dreams, but in the very fabric of the world itself. Its influence stretched across continents, across generations, always pulling people toward it, always reminding them that they had been touched. But its hunger was not only for the body, it was for the soul, the memory, the experience. And it had learned to devour things without ever touching them. It had learned to eat you before you even realized you had already been consumed. Nina, Joshua, Maria, and Alastair, each of them now carries the mark of the mouth. They are spread far apart, yet they are all drawn into the same terrible web of hunger. It doesn't matter that they are miles apart, that they have never met in person. The mouth doesn't need them to mate. It knows them by the taste of their fear. As long as they remember, as long as they look, they are already part of the mouth's growing tapestry, and soon they will become it. The hollow that hungers, Part 5 expanded. The mouth was no longer a place. It had become a reality, a cosmic truth that stretched beyond the physical, past the limits of space and time. It began to eat away at the world's certainty until people no longer knew what was real and what was simply the taste of decay. The unraveling of time in Chicago. Elias Whitaker, a young clockmaker, noticed a shift in time, one that wasn't just personal but pervasive. At first, it was small, just a few seconds lost here and there. But as the weeks passed, the gaps in time grew larger until entire days began to bleed together. One Tuesday, Elias could swear he was still living through the same Thursday he had just experienced, his body caught in an endless cycle. It was as if time itself had forgotten to turn, unable to move forward. He tried to escape, but no matter where he went, no matter how far he ran, the same streets, the same faces, repeated in a loop, as if his entire city had been swallowed. He found himself at the same intersection, standing beside the same cracked street lamp, hearing the same voices whispering his name, Elias. Elias. The mouth is waiting. His clock, his most prized possession, began to tick backward on its own. First seconds, then minutes, then hours. Finally, it ticked backward through years, pulling Elias with it, until he stood on the precipice of his own birth. But he couldn't remember how it felt to be born. Meanwhile, Aisha Nolan, a researcher in Edinburgh, was tracking a new anomaly, a disappearing city. A small, almost invisible town called Taro appeared on maps, only to vanish again, as though it existed for no other reason than to be forgotten. After months of searching for it, Aisha found a single clue, a recording from a traveler who claimed to have walked the streets of Taro. The traveler described the town as abandoned, except for a single figure standing at the town's edge, staring into the horizon. He had a smile full of teeth. When Aisha arrived at the location described, she found nothing. No ruins, no buildings, just an empty void, like a piece of the earth had been erased. But the real horror came the next night when she lay in bed. Aisha awoke to a voice, her own voice, but distant, echoing through the dark. We cannot forget. In California, David Moore, a computer programmer who specialized in quantum coding, discovered something even more disturbing. He was working on a project involving multidimensional networks, a concept that allowed people to download memories from alternate realities. One evening, his system picked up an anomaly, a strange signal coming from an unknown source. The code was riddled with familiar phrases, words David had never typed. "Feed me. You will be swallowed." "The mouth," he whispered. His heart raced. He scrolled through the data, trying to decode it. But the closer he got, the clearer it became. This was not a program. It was a warning. A call, and then, in a blinding flash, the screen went dark. When it flickered back on, his system was running a file he did not recognize. The name of the file was David Moore, The Mouth's Gift. Inside, it was nothing but a loop of images, faces he had never seen but somehow knew. Their expressions were warped, their mouths wide open, gasping for air in desperate hunger. As they chanted in unison, the sound grew louder, then softer, until it was a whispering hum inside his own mind. "Feed the mouth in the silence of your thoughts." In San Antonio, Bridget Lambert, a former criminal profiler, came across an old case file from the 1970s. The case involved a man named Harlan Murchison, who had been arrested for serial killings. The strange thing was that all of his victims, evidence showed, had been frozen in place, their faces contorted in expressions of horror. The hollow that hungers, Part 5, expanded. The mouth was no longer a place. It had become a reality. A cosmic truth that stretched beyond the physical, past the limits of space and time. It began to eat away at the world's certainty until people no longer knew what was real and what was simply the taste of decay. The unraveling of time in Chicago, Elias Whitaker, a young clockmaker, noticed a shift in time. One that wasn't just personal but pervasive. At first, it was small, just a few seconds lost here and there. But as the weeks passed, the gaps in time grew larger until entire days began to bleed together. One Tuesday, Elias could swear he was still living through the same Thursday he had just experienced, his body caught in an endless cycle. It was as if time itself had forgotten to turn, unable to move forward. Thought he tried to escape, but no matter where he went, no matter how far he ran, the same streets, the same faces, repeated in a loop, as if his entire city had been swallowed. He found himself at the same intersection, standing beside the same cracked street lamp, hearing the same voices whispering his name, Elias. Elias. The mouth is waiting. His clock, his most prized possession, began to tick backward on its own. First seconds, then minutes, then hours. Finally, it ticked backward through years, pulling Elias with it, until he stood on the precipice of his own birth. But he couldn't remember how it felt to be born. Meanwhile, Aisha Nolan, a researcher in Edinburgh, was tracking a new anomaly, a disappearing city. A small, almost invisible town called Taro appeared on maps, only to vanish again, as though it existed for no other reason than to be forgotten. After months of searching for it, Aisha found a single clue, a recording from a traveler who claimed to have walked the streets of Taro. The traveler described the town as abandoned, except for a single figure standing at the town's edge, staring into the horizon. He had a smile full of teeth. When Aisha arrived at the location described, she found nothing. No ruins, no buildings, just an empty void, like a piece of the earth had been erased. But the real horror came the next night when she lay in bed. Aisha awoke to a voice, her own voice, but distant, echoing through the dark. We cannot forget. In California, David Moore, a computer programmer who specialized in quantum coding, discovered something even more disturbing. He was working on a project involving multidimensional networks, a concept that allowed people to download memories from alternate realities. One evening, his system picked up an anomaly, a strange signal coming from an unknown source. The code was riddled with familiar phrases, words David had never typed. "Feed me. You will be swallowed." "The mouth," he whispered. His heart raced. He scrolled through the data, trying to decode it. But the closer he got, the clearer it became. This was not a program. It was a warning. A call, and then, in a blinding flash, the screen went dark. When it flickered back on, the hollow that hungers, Part 6, expanded. The mouth was not a singular entity, it was an infection of the mind. It reached out not just to consume bodies, but to pull on the very fabric of consciousness, twisting and fracturing the world into shapes that could no longer be recognized. But as the mouth's hunger spread, so too did the realization that it was not alone. There were others like it, entities that lived between the folds of existence, hungry for the same thing, a world to consume. The invisible threads in New York. A man named Samuel Gray had once been a quiet philosopher, a thinker who had preferred the life of books over social interaction. But that all changed when he came across a particular text during his research, a text that had no author, no date, no origin. It was a mere pamphlet, folded neatly on the desk of a dusty second-hand bookshop. The title was simple, almost innocuous, "The Mouth and Its Children." The pamphlet describes something terrible. The mouth was not a singular entity, but a family of creatures, all of whom fed on different parts of reality: memories, time, bodies, souls. They were bound to one another by a single hunger, one that could only be satisfied when the last piece of existence was consumed. The mouth was just the beginning, the first of many, waiting for the right moment to rise. Samuel spent weeks poring over the pamphlet, becoming obsessed until it drove him to madness. He started seeing patterns in everything: his interactions with people, the way time moved, the way his thoughts sometimes felt out of his control. Everywhere he went, there were whispers, not just from people, but from the buildings themselves, the streets, the lights, the air. The whispers were calling him to the mouth.at the same time. In London, Harriet Nash, a renowned neurologist, had been studying an outbreak of mass hallucinations that seemed to strike random groups of people. They all reported seeing the same figure, a man with a mouth so wide it swallowed the world around him. But what truly disturbed Harriet was the fact that the hallucinations didn't end when the people woke up. They lingered, embedded deep into their minds, pulling them closer to madness with every passing day. Harriet theorized that these hallucinations were a symptom of something much larger, a breakdown in reality itself. There were too many people experiencing the same visions, and the shared hallucination couldn't just be a product of stress, anxiety, or sleep deprivation. No, these people were remembering something, as though the mouth was forcing them to recall what they had forgotten. She began running tests on herself, wondering if she, too, had been affected. One night, in the middle of an experiment, her own reflection in the mirror began to change. Her face grew pale, her mouth stretching impossibly wide, as if it were preparing to swallow her whole. The moment she blinked, it was gone, but Harriet's fingers trembled. Her mouth hadn't moved. Meanwhile, in Berlin, Jonas Keller, a scientist working on quantum theories, had started hearing voices in the static. It began when he was working late one evening, his headphones on, listening to a long-forgotten radio frequency he had intercepted months ago. The hum had always been faint, but tonight it was different. Tonight, the hum was speaking. It spoke in cryptic phrases that made little sense, but Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that they were messages, trying to tell him something crucial. The more he listened, the clearer it became. You are not alone. You are the feeder. Jonas could feel the sensation of something reaching through the static, touching the deepest parts of his mind. His skin crawled, and his breath became shallow. It was as if something was unfolding in his chest, spreading, consuming. Then, in a sudden burst, he saw it. The mouth.it was in the static, twisting, consuming the very fabric of reality. Its teeth stretched, its hunger unfathomable, ready to pull everything apart. The first convergence as the mouth continued to devour and consume, it became clear that its hunger was not just physical. It was a deep cosmic hunger, one that transcended dimensions. It sought convergence, the joining of all things, a singular moment when reality would collapse in on itself. But there were those who sought to understand it, to expose its true nature before it consumed everything. David Moore, the quantum coder from California, had continued his investigation into the mysterious signals that had once plagued his system. The signals were becoming more coherent now, as though something or someone was trying to reach him directly. Late one night, as he cracked open the final layers of the corrupted code, a new file appeared on his screen. The mouth will reclaim. The moment he clicked on it, his entire reality shifted. He was no longer sitting in front of his computer. He was standing in a vast, empty landscape, one that stretched on forever. The sky was a deep shade of black, full of swirling, chaotic patterns. And before him stood a massive cavern, its entrance a gaping maw, too wide to comprehend. And in that moment, David realized the mouth had always been there. It had always been waiting. But now it was coming for him. As the mouth's hunger loomed closer, David felt the pull of all things, memories, moments, pieces of his life, all rushing towards the mouth as though he were nothing more than a single morsel. The final convergence. Back in Chicago, Elias Whitaker, the clockmaker, had managed to escape the endless loop of time, at least for a moment. But the break was temporary. He felt the pull again. The mouth was closer, and the seconds lost were coming back, returning to gather him. He tried to run. He tried to fight it. But every clock in the city began to tick backward, erasing his steps, erasing his escape. Time, like a rope, coiled around him, tightening. And then, just as he reached the intersection where it had all started, the mouth opened. But this time, it wasn't just a mouth. It was the void, stretching beyond every. The hollow that hungers. Part 6 expanded. The mouth was not a singular entity, it was an infection of the mind. It reached out not just to consume bodies, but to pull on the very fabric of consciousness, twisting and fracturing the world into shapes that could no longer be recognized. But as the mouth's hunger spread, so too did the realization that it was not alone. There were others like it, entities that lived between the folds of existence, hungry for the same thing, a world to consume. The invisible threads. In New York, a man named Samuel Gray had once been a quiet philosopher, a thinker who had preferred the life of books over social interaction. But that all changed when he came across a particular text during his research, a text that had no author, no date, no origin. It was a mere pamphlet, folded neatly on the desk of a dusty secondhand. The hollow that hungers. Part 7 expanded. Reality was no longer a concept anyone could comprehend. The cities, once full of life, had become twisted remnants of themselves. What was once a busy street in New York now appeared as a crumbling, half-erased memory, with the buildings half-finished, as if time itself had forgotten how to properly exist. The world had become decayed, like an old photograph, the edges blurred, the faces fading away. Yet, in the dark corners of this broken existence, there were those still fighting, still trying to understand the hunger that consumed everything they had ever known. The last stand in what was left of Chicago, Elias Whitaker had come to a grim realization. He had spent weeks, maybe months, running from the mouth, trying to escape the city that now felt like a prison. Time had collapsed in on itself, and every corner he turned led him back to the same broken intersection, the same cracked street lamp. But now he understood. There was no escape. The mouth had woven itself into the very fabric of existence, and it was only a matter of time before everything was gone. He had seen the faces of those who had been consumed. They still lingered in the streets, their expressions frozen in eternal terror, their mouths wide open as if to scream, but unable to. Elias felt the pull again. A gnawing emptiness, deep inside him. It was as though something was trying to drag his very soul from his body. He could feel his heartbeat in his throat, a sickening rhythm that matched the hunger of the void. He stumbled to the edge of the intersection, where an old clock tower stood, its hands frozen in time. His breath was shallow, his mind racing, trying to hold on to something, anything. And then he saw it. The mouth.it wasn't just a physical entity anymore. It had become a presence, a living void that stretched beyond what was known. Its teeth were not just teeth. They were the teeth of all things lost, gnashing in the darkness. The mouth itself was reality, and every particle in the world was being devoured. Time, memories, existence, all were being folded into its insatiable hunger. Meanwhile, in Berlin, Jonas Keller stood in front of a window, staring at the night sky. He could see the swirling, dark voids in the atmosphere. The mouth had begun to manifest in the stars themselves. It was pulling at the fabric of the universe, twisting it. He had tried everything, calculations, equations, theories, but nothing made sense anymore. The universe was no longer the set of predictable laws it had once been. He could feel the distortion creeping through every part of his being. His thoughts weren't his own anymore. He had seen glimpses of himself, his past, unraveling like a frayed thread. And then, in the reflection of the window, he saw something move. A shape, no, a mass, moving through the streets. It was the mouth, but not in the form he had expected. It was now everywhere. Its teeth were everywhere. Swallowing reality, its hunger stretching across dimensions. It was pulling everything, even the very fabric of space and time, into its maw. Jonas couldn't resist it. His mind was already starting to fracture. He could hear the whispers again. The voices had returned, more insistent than ever before. They weren't just in the static. They were in him, urging him to let go, become the feeder. The whispers cooed. He wanted to scream, to fight back, but his mouth wouldn't move. All he could do was watch as the walls of his apartment began to melt, folding into the void. The buildings, the sky, the people, they all became swallowed up by the mouth's insatiable hunger. In London, Harriet Nash had spent weeks locked away in her apartment, trying to understand the terrible phenomenon that had plagued the world. The hallucinations had worsened. The city had become a barren wasteland, with only fragments of memories remaining. There were moments when she would step into the street and find herself staring at a version of herself that didn't recognize her. She would hear her voice call out to her, but it was never the same voice, always slightly different, always distorted. She had found something in her research, an ancient text hidden in the back of a forgotten library. It had described something called the feeding hour, a moment when the mouth would pull everything into itself, devouring the very essence of existence. That moment had come. Her own reflection had begun to distort, the shape of her face warping, the edges blurring as if it were an old, torn photograph. She reached for the mirror, but as her fingers touched the surface, it rippled like water, sucking her into the glass. The mouth had already begun to take her. As the mouth spread, the boundaries of reality began to crumble. There was no longer a distinction between what was real and what was not. The world had been eaten from the inside out, and those who were left were now but fragments, pieces of a broken, collapsing universe. David Moore, the quantum coder, felt it, too. His mind was now a battlefield between the last fragments of his old self and the consuming hunger of the mouth. In the silence of his home, he could hear the whispers of all the souls that had been devoured before him. They were reaching out, trying to speak, trying to make him understand. You will feed the mouth. The words filled his mind, and as they did, David realized that he was already part of it. There was no escape, no future. There was only the mouth, the consuming force that would eventually devour everything, even time itself. All the fragments of the world, memories, lives, and realities would be consumed into the infinite hunger. And as David, Harriet, Jonas, and Elias succumbed to their fate, they realized something. They were not just victims. They were part of the mouth. They would become the mouths themselves, feeding on those who were left, passing the hunger on to the next soul. The final collapse. The mouth's hunger was now cosmic, no longer tied to any single place or time. It stretched through every dimension, devouring the very essence of all things. The stars themselves began to fade, the moon swallowed by the dark maw of the void. It was no longer just the world that was crumbling. It was the universe itself. There was no sound, no scream, just the infinite silence of all things consumed, all things erased. The mouth had won. It had devoured everything that had once been. Time was no longer a concept. Existence was an echo of an echo, an endless hunger without beginning or end. And the mouth waited, ever patient, ever hungry, for the next reality to bend to its insatiable will. I can hear my own voice echoing, but it feels distant, detached, like it's not quite me speaking. as if something has slowly begun to take my place. It started innocently enough, at first, a strange sensation in the pit of my stomach, like the feeling you get when you're about to do something terribly wrong, but you don't know what. I remember it so clearly now, how I woke one night to a soft tapping on my window. I thought it was just a branch, the wind playing tricks. But when I peered outside, there was nothing but the thick, black night. That it wasn't the wind that did it, though. No, it was the silence, the quiet that crept over me like a suffocating fog. I thought I heard whispering, too, just faint enough to not be sure if it was my mind or something else, a voice that called me from the darkness. I told myself to ignore it, to push it away, but it became a presence, a constant weight on my chest as the days passed. I began to forget things. Little things at first, where I put my keys, what I was supposed to do next, the feeling of safety in my own home. It was the eyes that did it, though. I remember the way they followed me. Those eyes, always watching from the corner of my vision, lurking in the shadows. And then one night, in the dim light of my kitchen, I saw it. No, it saw me. It was me, standing there, staring back at myself from the darkened reflection in the oven door. But it wasn't right. The eyes, too wide, too hollow, the skin stretching unnaturally over its face, like it was about to crack open. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was as if my own reflection was holding me there, forcing me to witness the grotesque transformation that was happening inside me that I've been changing ever since. It's like something is clawing its way out of me, taking over piece by piece. I can feel it in the way my breath catches when I look into the mirror. There's something in my eyes now, something that wasn't there before. The whispers have become louder, clearer, like voices pressing against my skull, urging me to follow them into the night. But it's the worst when I wake up in the middle of the night, my own voice calling out to me. But from the darkness, whispering things I don't remember thinking. I can never shake the feeling that there's something standing just behind me, watching, waiting for the moment when I'm finally too far gone to remember who I really am. The worst part? I can feel it, that thing I'm becoming. It's almost here, just on the other side of my skin, ready to step out and take over. And I know now, there's no escaping it, no running. It's too late for that. And as I stand here telling you this, my reflection is smiling back at me, a smile that's not my own, but one I'm starting to recognize as mine. I think it's waiting for me to stop speaking, to stop telling you my story. I think it's waiting for me to let it take me. I stand here, my voice trembling as I recount the nightmare that I once believed to be something I could escape. But the truth, the crushing truth that has bled into every waking moment of my existence, is that I was never meant to escape it. This story, my story, has no ending, no resolution. It continues, and I am caught in the pages, unwilling and yet unable to stop myself from turning them. There's something familiar in the way these events unfold, a terrible rhythm, a pulse that beats louder each day, each hour, until it reverberates through my very bones. That it began, as I said, with that tapping. That infernal, relentless tapping that gnawed at my mind until I couldn't ignore it any longer. It was the first sign, the first flicker of awareness that something wasn't right, but I didn't know what. I couldn't have known. You don't realize how deep a hole is until you're at the bottom of it, looking up at the pinpricks of light that once seemed so far away, so safe. I told myself it was just a figment, a trick of the wind or my tired mind playing cruel games, but the tapping kept coming, louder, faster, until it became a part of the night itself. It was insistent, growing more frantic, until the silence no longer felt like peace, but a warning that I tried to ignore it. Of course I did. I tried to drown it out with the hum of my television, the drone of background noise. But nothing worked. The tapping grew louder, more intense, until it rattled my very bones. And that's when it happened, the first true moment of horror. That night, I went to the window, my heart pounding in my chest as though it, too, was warning me of something just outside my grasp. The night air was thick, cold, pressing against my skin like a hand, and I couldn't see anything in the dark. Nothing, except for the eyes.at first. I thought it was just a trick of the light, perhaps a stray reflection, or the gleam of an animal's gaze. But no, there was something else in those eyes. Something wrong. They were too wide, too empty, as though the very concept of life had been sucked out of them. I leaned closer to the glass, my breath fogging up the window, my hands trembling as I wiped it away, trying to focus on what was outside. But I didn't need to look closely. I already knew. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, that instinctual knowledge, like a warning bell that had been rung far too late. They were mine, or at least they looked like mine. Those eyes. But they weren't. They were something else, something hollow, something older, wiser in a way that was twisted and unrecognizable. As I stared, unable to tear myself away from their unblinking gaze, I felt a shift. It was subtle at first, just a ripple in the air, like the static before a storm, but it intensified, growing more violent with every passing second. The whispering started again. Those faint voices, barely audible at first, now clear and insistent, come closer that I didn't want to. I didn't. But my feet moved without my consent, dragging me toward the door, toward the window where those eyes waited in the darkness. I opened it. My body obeyed, moving as if it was no longer my own. The cold air hit me like a slap, biting into my skin, but I didn't feel it. I couldn't feel anything. Not really. Not anymore did I remember the way the world shifted as I stepped out into the yard. The trees loomed like twisted sentinels, their branches creaking in the wind, but they weren't the only thing that moved. Something was out there, something that had been waiting for me, watching me, just as those eyes had watched me. The whispers grew louder now, wrapping around my thoughts, drowning out my ability to think, to reason. Follow the sound. Follow the calling that I don't know how long I stood there, staring into the void of the night. But when I finally looked up, I saw it, a figure. Tall, imposing, standing just at the edge of the yard, half hidden in shadow. It was me, or something that had been me, a twisted reflection of myself. Its eyes gleamed with that same hollow emptiness, that same wrongness, and its lips curled upward in a grin that wasn't mine, but felt so familiar, as if I'd worn that smile 1,000 times before, only I'd never seen it like this. That I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. My feet were cemented to the ground, and I knew, deep down, that this was no ordinary night. That thing, that creature that was standing there, waiting, was the reason the tapping had come, the reason for the whispering, the reason I had been drawn into this madness. It was the reason I couldn't escape, and so I asked it despite myself. I didn't want to. I really didn't. But I asked, "What do you want?" The creature didn't answer with words. Instead, it reached into the darkness and pulled something toward it, something that glinted with malice in the faint moonlight. It was a mirror, cracked and distorted, its surface rippling like the surface of a disturbed pond. As I stared into it, I saw myself again, but not quite. This version of me was different. The face was paler, gaunter, the eyes wide and unnaturally bright, reflecting back the emptiness that had once been mine. But it wasn't just my reflection I saw. Behind me, in the mirror, there was another figure, one that lurked just out of sight, moving in the shadows, just out of reach, but always there, always waiting. The creature behind me in the mirror smiled, and I saw it, the truth, the one I had refused to acknowledge for so long. It wasn't just a reflection. It wasn't just a thing looking back at me. It was me, and yet it wasn't. The thing in the mirror was something else, something that had always been there, beneath the surface, clawing its way out, waiting for the moment when I was weak enough, when I would finally let it take over, and I knew then. I knew what I had to do. There was no escaping this. There never had been. The whispers had told me the truth all along, but I couldn't hear it. I hadn't wanted to hear it. But now, as I stand here before you, telling you my story, I understand. I understand that I am no longer in control. I have become the thing I feared, the thing that called me into the night, the thing that has been inside me all along, just waiting for its chance to take over. The transformation didn't happen all at once. No, it was slow, agonizing, like a sickness that seeped into my bones, creeping through my veins, making me want to give in. I could feel the change in the way my thoughts began to slip away, replaced by a darker hunger, a gnawing emptiness that never went away. And the eyes, my eyes, were no longer mine. They had become the eyes of something else, something older, something hungrier that I used to think I could fight it. I thought I could resist. But resistance is futile when the thing inside you has already claimed your soul. Now, I stand here, my voice trembling as I tell you this. But inside, I can hear the whispers again, louder than ever, urging me to stop telling you everything. They want me to stop. They want me to keep it inside, to bury it deep where no one will find it. But I can't stop. Because if I do, if I stop telling you this, I know what will happen. I will be consumed. I will disappear into the shadows. And when you look for me, you won't find me. Only the thing that was never me, that has taken my place, standing where I used to be, with eyes too wide, too hollow, smiling that smile I now recognize as my own. And you'll know that it's already too late, because you won't just be seeing me. You'll be seeing the thing that I've become. The thing that's been waiting, and it's hungry. So very, very hungry. The hunger grows, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness, a relentless beast that claws its way through every waking moment. It pulls me down, deeper, into the abyss where I can no longer tell where I end and it begins. The transformation is no longer subtle, no longer creeping. It is violent now, urgent, as if the very air is thick with the need to devour, to consume. And I am its vessel. It has taken hold of me completely, reshaping me into something I can't even recognize anymore. The reflection in the mirror is not just a trick of the light anymore. No, it is me. But it's not. It's the thing that has stolen my face, my voice, my soul. But it doesn't just take. No, it gives too. It feeds on everything it touches, my thoughts, my memories, my very identity. Each day, a little more of me slips away, absorbed into the darkness that has taken root inside of me. I can feel it, the weight of it pressing against my skin, clawing at my insides, filling me with a hunger I cannot satisfy. I try to remember who I was, but those memories are starting to fade, like a fog retreating into the distance. They are slipping through my fingers, like sand falling through an open hand. I remember. No, I don't remember the first time it truly spoke to me. It wasn't in words at first. It was in feelings, in sensations, and images that flooded my mind when I closed my eyes. It showed me things, terrible, twisted things, places I had never been, faces I had never seen. But it wasn't just the images that haunted me. It was the knowledge. It was as if I had always known these things, deep inside, locked away in the dark recesses of my mind. And now they were surfacing. Now I was remembering things I shouldn't. Things I could never have known. It told me that I was never meant to be who I thought I was. That my life, my existence, had always been a lie. It whispered that I was a vessel, that I had been chosen long ago, before I even knew what it meant, before I had any understanding of what this hunger would consume. It told me that I was not meant to live among the living. No, I was meant to become something else. Something greater. I didn't believe it at first. How could I? I was just me. But now I understand. I see the truth in its eyes, in the eyes that are mine but not. The eyes that reflect something older, something darker. The hunger that has taken root in my chest, in my very soul, is not a curse. It is a gift that has been waiting for me to accept it, to open my mind to the truth. I am becoming something more, something beyond human, something that no longer needs the petty concerns of flesh and bone. It is freedom, freedom from the weakness of the body, from the frailty of the mind, freedom from being. I am becoming a thing of hunger, a thing that devours not just flesh, but souls. The reflection in the mirror, that thing, that grin, it is what I am becoming. It is who I was always meant to be. And every moment that I hold on to my old self, every moment I fight against this change, it hurts. It tears at my insides like 1,000 knives, each one carving away pieces of me, until there is nothing left but the hunger. I try to fight it. I try to resist. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I look in the mirror and beg for mercy, beg for something, anything, to return me to the person I once was. But the face that looks back at me isn't mine anymore. It's a mask, a hollow mask that bears my shape but not my soul. And in those moments, I know the truth. There is no return. There is only this, only the hunger. And yet, despite all of this, I can't bring myself to stop. I can't stop telling you, because deep down, a part of me knows that by sharing this, I am releasing myself, surrendering completely. It is the last shred of resistance I have left, the last thread that ties me to the person I used to be. But I can feel it slipping through my fingers, like water, like sand. I hear the whispers now, louder than ever. They call me to the place where I belong, where I am needed, where my true purpose lies. It is not here, with you, telling this story. It is elsewhere, somewhere beyond this veil of flesh and blood, where I will shed what's left of my humanity, where I will be reborn. I see it in my dreams now, that place. The shadows, thick and suffocating, wrapping around me like a cloak. The sound of feeding, of devouring, echoing in the darkness. I see myself, or rather, I see it, the thing I am becoming, moving through the shadows, unburdened by the weakness of the body. I see it devouring, consuming, tearing through the veil that separates the living from the dead, the human from the monstrous. And in those dreams, I feel it, the freedom. The hunger is my master now. It guides me, pulls me forward, telling me where to go, telling me how to feed. I am no longer in control, and I have no desire to be. I know that this is what I was meant for. This is what I am now. And yet, despite this knowledge, I can't help but look back, just for a moment, at what I've left behind. There are fragments of me still, faint echoes of who I once was, scattered in the corners of my mind. I remember the way I used to laugh, the way the sun felt warm on my face, the taste of a meal shared with friends. I remember what it felt like to be whole, to be human. But those memories are fading, and I know that soon there will be nothing left but the hunger. Nothing left but the thing that has taken my place. I used to think I could escape this. I used to think there was a way out. But now, as I stand here, telling you this, I realize there never was. This was my fate all along. I was always meant to become this, to shed the skin of the person I was and become something greater. something that hungers, that feeds, that devours. And now, as the hunger takes over completely, as I feel it tearing at me from the inside, I know there is no more resistance. There is no more fight. There is only the next step, the next victim, the next meal. And when you look for me next, when you search for the person I used to be, you won't find me, because I will have already found you.